for our valedictory, right?
So shall I start, ma'am?
Is it two now? Let me just
Yeah,
check.
yeah.
Yeah, please do. It's 2-1. Yeah.
Amongst the speaker who is there, Nilanjana Chakravarti.
Nilanjan Chakravarti, not
Acha,
Nilanjana.
okay, Nilanjan Chakravarti is here.
Yes, yes,
Yes,
I'm here.
I
Yes.
could see him.
Okay,
Yes,
and then Dr. Sudarshan.
he's here.
Then
Confirm.
Ralte is here.
Lalte is here. Lalsam Blau.
Yes, I'm here.
Uh,
Yeah, she's here.
okay, and Inla is here.
Gifty was there.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
I'm
Gift
here.
is there. Gift is there.
Okay, you have now. You start off. The others will get the
Okay,
to join in. You please begin. Pavan,
okay. Good
begin.
afternoon.
Wait,
Afternoon
wait.
session on race and marginality.
Aisha, hold on.
Yeah.
Let Pavan introduce you. Pavan is our
Okay.
coordinator for this session, and then
Okay.
you
Okay.
take on. Yeah,
Okay. Fine.
let it be the protocol.
Yes, Pawan.
Okay, ma'am. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Pawan Kumar from the Department of English, Dayal Singh Evening College. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of our department and college to this erudite and enriching conference. As the chair of this panel on race and marginality, we have with us Dr. Aisha Irfan. She is an associate professor in the Department of English, Dayal Singh College, University of Delhi. Irfan's areas of specialization are African American literature and Dalit literature. She wrote her doctoral thesis on Toni Morrison and MPhil dissertation on Alex Haley's roots. She is also a prolific translator and has translated from Urdu and Hindi. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation. And
Thank you, Pawan.
in the panel, we have some thought-provoking papers, and I'm sure this session will give us a lot of ideas to ponder over and understand our society vis-a-vis race and marginality. And this is a small message for all the participants to turn on their video so that we can take a screenshot. And now I would like to request Dr. Irfan to take over and start the session. Over to you,
Okay.
ma'am.
Thank you so much. Well, I have also taught at the Elsing Evening College. I joined the Elsing Evening College in 1996. Then I left in 1998 briefly to rejoin in 2000.
And all the presenters.
2001,
Oh my God,
yeah, I
when you join.
joined the morning college. So the building is the same. The governing body is the same. So I belong to this college, and it's a pleasure to be chairing a session here. Thanks to Brati to give me this opportunity. Doing a session on race and marginality. Very sadly, we lost Bell Hooks yesterday, and Bell Hooks was one African American writer who has written very powerfully. Just like Morrison, she has her focus was the intersectionality of race, capitalism, gender, class, and some of her very significant writings were on film on include real race, sex, and class in movies. Then feminist theory from margins to center is another book. Yearning, race, gender, and cultural politics. Begin by paying our respects to a major African American writer whom we lost yesterday. We have a very interesting lineup of papers here. I see two Coetzee is here um, uh, um, Nadine Godimer. Two Nobel laureates are here. Booker Prize winning works are in this particular session, and the first paper is by Dr. Nilanjan Chakravarti, who is an assistant professor in Panchila Mahavidyalaya, West Bengal. So, as far as I think we'll take turn wise. The first reserve the end of the session space for question and answers, and we'll just begin with the session directly. I invite Dr. Nilanjan Chakravarti to take over. The Negro speaks of rivers, writing from the margins in Zadie Smith's The Embassy of Cambodia. This is a short story, if I'm not mistaken, and it won the BBC award.
Thank you, madam, for your very kind introduction. So, my paper is on the writings from the margins, and of course, negotiating the very problematics in constructing the question of the margin and the center. As ma'am was saying that we lost bell hooks yesterday, and she is one of the major proponents of the center margin dialectics. So, in this particular short story that Zadie Smith writes, this particular short story engages a particular female protagonist called Fatou, and she is the one who is in a European city in continental Europe, and she is the one who is wanting to be at the center, but then she cannot be so because the question of the race becomes very important, because in the European space she is the one who is other. So she is indeed the other, the other entity in that European space. Now, I would like to sort of first of all quote a particular thing from New Ethnicities by Stuart Hall. So Stuart Hall observes that culture. Ma'am, can you please mute yourself? I mean, that will be easier, I guess. This is, thank you. So this is the quote from New Ethnicities by Stuart Hall. Culture comes into play at precisely the point where biological individuals become subjects, and that what lies between the two is not some automatically constituted natural process of socialization, but much more complex process of formation. So therefore, Stuart Hall is basically talking about is the whole question of epistemological othering. You know, how language becomes a very important part of othering the subjects, and that's why he says that there is there is nothing called a natural process of socialization, but there is a much more complex process of formation. And what formation is Stuart Hall talking about? Obviously, the formation of the other. So therefore, the formation of the other, involves not only a racial othering, not only a process of othering through identities, but the whole thing of othering, the whole politics of othering is epistemological as well. That is done through language. So language becomes a very important way of violating the codes of human rights. So therefore, in that text, what we see is that Fatou is desirous of entering the embassy of Cambodia. Now, even before that, what we see is that the narrator enters into a kind of a collective consciousness when she says that there are very many women and black men who enter Europe, and then they are forced to live a life which is of being the second-class citizens. So the problem, therefore, is that even though they enter Europe, which is supposedly the most democratic of all spaces, yet in that democratic space they are othered. Democratic, of course, I'm talking about a reality in the 21st century, not the colonial times, but the 21st century, where it is presumably democratic. But the point remains that in that space, what we see is that there are people like Fatou whose passports are even taken away. In fact, Fatou's employer takes away her passport so that she cannot escape that particular space. So therefore, they are forced into an essentialized existence of being the other. And that is where the problem of Fatou starts with. Now, she's desirous of a particular entrance. What entrance is that? Well, she wants to enter the the embassy of Cambodia. Why is it so? Because the embassy of Cambodia symbolizes a certain epistemological and political center. Okay, so this is an epistemological center
Have we lost?
Yeah, so can you hear me now? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So therefore, the thing is that you see, what we see is that this embassy of Cambodia, of which Fatu is a symbolic center, epistemological and um, yeah. Sorry, I'm losing some of the connections, I suppose. Okay, so I'm sorry for. So therefore, the thing is that here is the embassy of Cambodia, which is
Nilanjan, a
yes,
suggestion. If you
yeah,
shut down your camera, keep your
yeah.
voice on, then we can hear you better. The
Okay,
bandwidth
okay.
will help. Do that.
Yeah. Okay. So therefore, as I was saying that this embassy of Cambodia that we are talking about, this embassy of Cambodia is a political and an epistemological center. Now, why is it an epistemological and political center? Because this center, or the political center of the embassy of Cambodia, symbolizes, the embassy of Cambodia symbolizes a certain space where Fatu will get the identity of being at the center. So therefore, when she is working as a modern day slave, her passport being taken away by her employer, she is right at the margins. But when she will be entering, when she will be entering the embassy of Cambodia, she will be entering as a citizen of Cambodia. So what is very important for us to realize is that the embassy of Cambodia becomes a certain symbolic center in the text. Okay, so the embassy of Cambodia becomes a kind of a symbolic center in the text, and this symbolic center therefore is emblematic of Fatu's desire of climbing to the center, and therefore the moment she is trying to get into the center, the moment she is trying to get into the center, she is being resisted. How is she resisted? Well, she is not given the permission to enter the embassy of Cambodia because there is a question of class over there. She is a servant and therefore she cannot enter the embassy of Cambodia. So therefore what we see is that in the story there is an intersectionality of not only of race, but there is an intersectionality of race, class and gender. Now, Fatu has a boyfriend, of course, who is called Okonko. Now, Okonko is a man who is aware of the fact that there are black identities in Europe who struggle to get into the center, and therefore he actually advises Fatu to not to take things too seriously. So, I would actually, in this particular section, I would like to quote, Hall and Adams. And here, Stuart Hall again notes that I think you always, as I quote, I think you always need the double perspective before you say that you have to understand what it is like to come from the other place, how it feels to live in that closed world. But you also have to be true to your own culture of debate, and you have to find some way to begin to translate between these two cultures. Now, in Fatu, what we see is that there is a definite sense of, desire where she wants to move into the embassy of Cambodia, because the embassy of Cambodia will therefore give her a sense of the center, not only in terms of race but also in terms of class. At the end of the story, what we see, so I'm not going through the story in a literal sense, but I'm going through it critically. So therefore, what we see is that, you see, at the end of the story, Fatu does enter the the embassy of Cambodia. What I think is that the narrative strategy which has been adopted by Z.D. Smith over here is very, very symbolic and very political as well. So therefore, there are a lot of auditory stimulus that Fatu gets from within the embassy of Cambodia. So therefore, she gets the auditory stimulus of people playing tennis within the embassy of Cambodia. She gets the auditory stimulus of people getting, of people having conversations with each other. These auditory stimulus, therefore, play a part in expanding the territory of the desire in Fatu to walk into the embassy of Cambodia, so that she enters into the center in terms of class as also in terms of race. So therefore, as Franz Fanon in Richard of the Earth, or later on in Ngugi wa Thiong'o, they all noted in the post-colonial discourses of their texts, that they all noted that there is always this desire, this factor of epistemological, racial, political, even personal desire on the part of the colonized subject to move into the center, so that this whole dialectics of the center margin conflict is broken down. So therefore, there is always this perennial desire to move towards the center. Fatu, thank you. Somebody wrote, excellent, thank you. So therefore, Fatu is also, is desirous to be at the center, and that auditory stimulus of the pox smash, that is from the text. The way in which she is listening to that tennis match, and the way she is wanting to get into the embassy of Cambodia, therefore, is kind of is very definitive of her, of her efforts to move to the center, which I believe is a bit tragic, because this whole idea of the center is very problematic, because we know that what is center is actually not the center. It is a colonial construction. The very construction of the center is a colonial construction, right? So therefore, this very emergence of Fatu to work from the margins and being desirous of the center is indeed very problematic. Now, at the end of the story, what we see is that Fatu does enter along with her boyfriend Okonko into the embassy of Cambodia, where they take a swim and they have their own time, which is again very emblematic of their resistance. I think it's one of the major portions in the text where there is a symbolic overstepping of this center margin dialectics. I know I'm using the word overstepping without any ethical considerations. So therefore, they literally overstep their ethical subjectivity, if I may say. So they overstep their ethical subjectivity in order to enter the center. What is the result of that? She is thrown out of her job, because somebody informs that she has entered this place, and therefore she is thrown out of her job, and she has to go in search of thing. What is also very significant in the story, I know I have just maybe 2 or 3 minutes left. So what is also very important in the text is this very subtle ironies which are there. The subtle ironies of othering. So in one of the sections, what we see is that Fatu cooks, but the kind of response that she wants from the people in the house under whom she is working, she does not get those responses. So people show a kind of, in fact, the people show a lot of negligence towards her. They don't talk to her properly. They don't address her properly. In fact, she is addressed as just a servant, sometimes even just as a nigger. So therefore, there is an epistemological silencing going on as far as Fatu is concerned. In language, she is silenced. She is a modern slave, so therefore she has to be silenced. In fact, even her political and ideological subjectivity is silenced. She is even denied a presence. And this silencing of the subject, this silencing the presence, as we all know, is indeed a very typical facet, a very typical feature of any colonial discourse, to silence the other. So therefore, Fatu, suffers from this politics of silencing, because within that white-dominated Europe, she is indeed the other. right? So therefore, at the end of the text, when she is, when she is thrown out of her house, she does become a modern day slave. So she's not a slave from the 19th century or the 18th or the 17th century who is transported across the Atlantic. She carries that hereditary, that trans epistemological heredity, or let's say the trans epistemological tradition of being the slave and being the other in a white dominated colonized society. And so therefore, when she has to move out of her house, her subjectivity is called into question, her very presence is called into question, and that is being denied. So therefore, I would like to end my presentation with a quotation of Bell Hooks, and I did this consciously because we lost her yesterday. So Bell Hooks says, "The wounded child inside many males is a boy when he first spoke his truths, was silenced by paternal sadism, by a patriarchal world that did not want him to claim his true feelings." So therefore, what is so significant is that she's talking about the paternal sadism, and therefore I would connect and say that this silencing of the subject, this silencing of the other, is indeed a result of colonial sadism. And this colonial sadism continues well into the 21st century, at a time when we are talking about democracy and human rights and liberalism. At that moment, in this capitalist moment of subjectivizing the other, what we are seeing is that the other is silenced, as an entity which has no right to even have a language of expression. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nilanjan. I read this short story long back, but what I remember is that this lady this servant used to steal the master's passes in order to go swim in the swimming pool. Also, I remember the symbolism of the badminton game. Only the shuttles, if I am not mistaken, because I read it several years back. At the same time, since you were talking about the modern day slaves, so I recall an incident within my home. There used to be a lady who used to work, and her son used to work in the Gulf. So his passport was taken away by the person who had employed him. And my father had to write innumerable letters to the embassy to virtually get him freed and back home. So eventually we had to write that his mother is so critical that the boy has to be sent back. So lady was quite okay, but obviously she was trying for her only son. She was a widow. She's passed away now. So modern day slavery has taken a different form, and yes, it does exist. I agree with you. We can take it up later, or we can ask Brati whether the questions are to be addressed immediately after the session or at the end of the session. Maybe one of you can help us. Is it open to deliberations, questions, or do we do that at the end of the session, Brati?
Ma'am,
Pawan?
ma'am, we could have them after the session, after the presenters are done.
Okay, okay.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
the second paper is the African American women playwrights. Lauren Hansberry is one. I remember Morrison wrote a play called Desdemona. So, African American playwrights, I think, came much later than the African American narrative tradition, the jazz and the blues age. We have Dr. Sudarshan Sahu, and we welcome him to this session. Yes, please, you can take over.
Esteemed chairperson and esteemed the faculties of University of Delhi, or we can Royal Singh Evening College, and all my dearest participants. The title of my paper is African American Women Playwrights as Taught. As you can understand, African American women, they have contributed a lot for the growth and development of African American dramaturgy or dramas, because they have a immense contribution for playwriting skills to present the sorrows and sufferings of the blacks. As you can understand, blacks are tormented and tortured by the whites, As I can tell you, it is the extension of the paper of our dearest Niranjan sir. It is an extension of the center margin complex. For this conflict, these new dramatists or the black women playwrights, they have presented the sorrows and sufferings of the blacks not in a realistic manner rather than in a surrealistic manner. They have presented the divided and division of consciousness, black white consciousness of the characters in the plays of Adrian Kennedy. I have selected three playwrights: Adrian Kennedy, I can tell you Lauren Hansbury, and Alice Childress. These three important and very prominent playwrights who have presented the plights of the blacks not in a realistic manner like the August Wilson as a male playwright, but they have presented the sufferings in a surrealistic manner. I can tell you, present you some of the biographical note of Adrienne Kennedy. Who is Kennedy? As you can see, she is a contemporary African American women playwright, and she has presented the or plays the divided consciousness of the characters, black, white, what we call the dual consciousness or the double consciousness of Franz Fanon, which is beautifully implemented in the plays of Adrian Kennedy. Because Adrian Kennedy has written the very prominent plays like Funny House of the Negro, The Old Answers, Rat's Mass, The Song, like a lesson in dead language, and a movie star has two, Black and White. These are the 5, 6 plays of Adrian Kennedy. And the most prominent play of Lauren Hansford is Rising in the Sun. So we shall discuss and debate on the theatrical styles and dramatic styles of these prominent plays. First of all, Adrian Kennedy is very utmost creative in her structuring and approach of the material. She is not a journalistic or dialectic style, but rather imagistic. Her plays are short and intense, but the dense language of symbolic poetry. Whenever you read the plays of Adrian Kennedy, you can see that there is a poetry in for the plays because you can see my I live in the white world, white beauty, white glory. There is a divided consciousness. I can tell you, the plays are written in a dream consciousness, full of consciousness between white and black, black and white. When the characters are coming, they are presenting the sorrows of the sufferings of the blacks. Either as a black character who is immediately transforming to the white one and then to the black one. Because this you can tell us is a dream consciousness, the divided consciousness of the character. The characters are fantasizing the white beauty of the Americans, black heritage of Africa, because their roots are connected to Africa and their consciousness are connected to the America. So white beauty, white glory, white monastery, white majesty, or white royalty, and the black heritage, the African roots and the African, I can tell you. So the plays of Adrian Kennedy are surrogating consciousness. So I can tell you, I can give you an example of Funny House of Negro. Funny House of Negro is a beautiful play. This play contains only 8 to 9 pages, but it is very difficult to understand when the character, like Sarah, his personality is split between various selves, SALVS. So there is a multiple cells who are coming to the stage, and one funny man is coming and laughing at it. He is laughing. Why are you are tied to the Negro, but you are attracted to the white beauty, white glory. My father was white. I was living in a white glass table, with European carpets. I was living like that. But I am tied to the Negro. My father is a Negro, and he's coming to the stage. He's coming and raping me, and that type of consciousness, that type of dreams are coming to her mind, and she is fantasizing. So Sarah fantasizes. One piece of dialogue I can tell. You can tell like that. Part of the time I live with Raymond, part of the time with God, friend Charles, Albert Sachs cover. So I live in my room. It is a small room on the top floor, brownstone in Westman. In New York, a room filled with dark old volumes, a narrow bed on the walls, old photographs, castles, monarchs of England. Because she is a black, she is black, but She is quite attracted and fascinated to the white beauty, white glory, and she's a major. She was reading in a city college of New York. That's why part of the time I live with Raymond, part of the God, friends, all, but I live in a one room. It is a small room on the top floor of brownstone in West 90s in New York. A room filled with my old balloons, a narrow bed on the wall, old photographs, castles, and monarchs of New York. So when Sarah fantasizes a character appearing with white nightgown, she seems to the mother of Sarah. The mother blames the white black beast that raped her, disappears. And another character steps is a faceless character. Very difficult to understand the characters coming and doing and playing their and presenting their dialects in a form of symbolic appearances, and they are disappearing the stage. And then I can tell you, the land lady, the landlady and the conny man. These are the two characters who are coming and just walking the divided into various acts. So like that, and another in the another scene, because this play is a one act play. It is one act play. It is not divided into different sets to acts, because it is a play ends and begins with the one scene and ends with the scene. But there are very multiple dramatic and theatrical styles and dramaturgy are there. You can understand. And another, Sarah also experiences the racial warfare within herself. That's why I can tell you, some of the readers, Madam has rightly mentioned and commented that African women perish. Some of the plays she might have read, and also this play she might have read. But whenever we read this play, it's very difficult to understand, very complex styles, technical techniques are there, and it is very difficult to comprehend, to understand the message communicated by Adrian Kelly, because he is a contemporary playwright and whose plays are have got all kinds of coveted. I can understand, tell you some of the important prizes, they call it in American society. So Sarah experiences the racial warfare within herself by consciously identifying the white oppressed against the black oppressed. She is tempted to believe that black is evil and shameful. She exemplifies the black internalization of such stereotypes used by whites to denounce blacks and put in their minds. So you can understand another dialogue when Sarah fantasizes, when I am not the doses of Oxford and myself. As for myself, I am a pallid Negro, pallid like Negro on the American Negro magazines, soul as educated and religious. So that you can understand. When she is not incapable of reaching to the white beauty, white glory, the European carpets, eating the white glass table, she is coming to the red, coming to her root. And then when Sarah, you can see, when I am not the duchess of Habsburg, I am myself. As for myself, I am type a black Negro, valued like Negroes on the Negro magazines, soulless, educated, and religious. Sarah says that she wished to live surrounded by European antiques, photographs of Roman ruins, Oriental carpets, and eat in a white glass double. Sarah is an English major at City College in New York. She lives in a small room on the top floor of the brownstone in Manhattan's West 90s. Her room is filled with old books, decorated with old photographs of English castles and monarchs. It is dominated by huge white plaster statue of Queen Victoria, seated on a pedestal with three steps leading to it. Sarah's preoccupation with Queen Victoria and Duchess of Habsburg indicates a overriding desire for white beauty and power or denial of black heritage. Sarah explains her dreams and aspirations of the white world. It is my dream to live in rooms with European antiques. My Queen Victoria, photographs of Roman ruins, walls of books, piano, oriental carpets. My friend will be white. I need them as a backhand to keep me from reflecting too much upon the fact that I am in Rome. So you can understand these are the white characters, the like that, Duchess of Habsburg, Maximilian, and these are the characters who has been beautifully connected and connected by Sarah. To see that these are the characters of white beauty, white glory. So also in the second play, you can tell that the second page can the whole answers. So coming to this whole answer, we can see the same technique but different, but interesting. Very complicated techniques are there, and complex techniques of theatrical styles and techniques of writing plays. You can see that Adrian Kennedy's one-act play, The Whole Answer, the first presented at New York Shakespeare Festival, Public Theatre in January 1969, and produced by Joseph Park. The fragmentation of characters are issue on this play. Because you can see another character like Clara Passmore. She who has a divided cells. She is a Clara Passmore, she is old, she is reverent, and she has a multiple cells. And these multiple cells are coming to the space and obstructed and prohibited, as I can tell you. They are hindered by characters like Shakespeare, Chaucer, William the Conqueror, Anne Boleyn. These are characters are telling not to go to the character like White because she is crying that my father is dead, but they are obstructing him. No, you cannot touch your father, even if your father is died by heart attack, you cannot touch her because you are black, you are Negro, and that is different. And another, when Shakespeare and Chaucer, they are the characters of the white world, they are the characters of the English society. So beautifully Kennedy has presented that the black, there is a immense gap, and there is a immense gap between the white and black. In unit, you can say that the America is incoherent without the contribution, without the substantial contribution of the blacks. America is incoherent without the contribution of blacks. But in the before the slavery or even after, you can tell that there are some distances between black and white. So that is presented by Kennedy. The characters like Shakespeare, Chaucer, William the Conqueror, Anne Boleyn, they are obstructing her not to go to see her father who is dead. But she is crying. She is crying. You see, I am going because when we are, my father was alive, we are coming to Lions to have a morning tea there. We are happy there and moving very morning tea, and we are visiting Tower of London. So then this character is transformed to a wolf because he is the result of the black mother and white father. That's why she is a wolf. Wool is a symbol of, I can tell you, is a symbol of evil. The symbol when is not a virtue, it is a sin. So naturally, the Reverend Passmore, he is a white father. He is blaming and coming to the stage and blaming. But softly, very softly, he is blaming that you are the result of this. And this is the bastard black mother. BBM, bastard black mother.
Has the link broken or is the end of paper? Hello? So what do we do?
I think he's lost his connection.
Uh, so, hello? Yeah, so what do we do?
Uh,
Well, as far as the theatre is concerned, just to put in, wait for Sudarshan ji to join in. There was a lot of theatricality even when the blacks were into the narrative tradition. Because while I was reading on say for example Douglas or the railroad uprising, these black activists used to come in front of so many black slaves and virtually perform, in the sense that Douglas used to, when he used to talk about the atrocities against the black, what he used to do is he used to even take off his shirt and show the whip lash marks on his backs. So, that theatrical tradition was there, but the blacks were not given the stage until the Harlem Renaissance. Before that, most of the stage performances where there were black characters were performed by whites wearing black marks or painting their face black. So it was quite revolutionary for black playwrights like Lorraine Hansberry to experiment with playwriting, because initially it was the narratives, blues, jazz, and then the fiction tradition of began with the writing of autobiography, and it was much later that the playwrights, that is during the Harlem Renaissance, significant black writers, took over the stage as well from the whites in terms of experimentation with new aesthetics that blacks were experimenting and at that particular point of time, that is in the early 20th century during the time of the Harlem Renaissance. Are we having Dr. Professor Sudarshan Sabu back, or are we moving on to the next paper is what I wish to know.
I think he's still disconnected. I can't see him in
Yeah,
the list of participants either. So maybe we can move on to the next paper, and in case he's able to rejoin, we can give him
okay, we can. Oh, you can
time
give
to
him a few.
conclude his
Yeah,
paper. Yes. Yeah.
fine. Okay, then we have exploring the politics of race in Coetzee's Age of Iron and Disgrace. Coetzee, again, we have a Nobel laureate here. I invite, just a second, I haven't got the name here with me. Can Madhuri help me with the name of the presenter here? Just a second. I'll
Just give me a
reopen the.
moment, Pavan. You have the name of the paper presenter with you?
I have the name myself. Just a second. It's yeah.
Ma'am, just give me a
Lal
moment.
Sangili Ralte is
Yes,
speaking
ma'am,
on
this is
Coexi. She is an assistant professor, Department of English, Mizoram. Hello, most welcome. I think you can take.
thank you, ma'am. So, okay. So, good afternoon, everyone.
It's been a real pleasure for me to be a part of this conference. My name it's Lalsang Lianiralte. Yes, and yes, like mentioned before, I'm from Mizoram, and as somebody who belongs to a so-called tribe, as somebody who doesn't belong to what is known as the mainland part of India. This would have been a good opportunity for me to talk about people, my culture, and literature from my region. But today I'm presenting a paper on exploring the politics of race in J.M. Coetzee's Age of Iron and Disgrace. And before I go ahead with my presentation, I just want to put a disclaimer out. No, we've not been having a regular supply of electricity the past few days, particularly in the afternoons. So, in case my Wi-Fi goes down, I have a backup plan. I'll be rejoining, but it might take a few moments. So, please bear with me if such a thing happens. Now, I'll move on to my paper. J.M. Coetzee, as I think we all know, was born in South Africa in the year 1940. He is a novelist as well as an essayist, a literary critic, linguist, as well as a translator. He was only 8 years old when the all-white National Party gained power in South Africa and immediately enforced apartheid, a system of legislation that promoted racial segregation between 1948 and 1994. He continued writing through the political crisis of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, which was a period during which the South African government was under extreme pressure to reconsider and reformulate its relationship with the black majority, both from within the country and from outside the country. South Africa has witnessed a turbulent political history that has seen through centuries of colonialism and apartheid, during which native South Africans were politically and legally marginalized by white settler communities who form a small part of the population. Even before the existence of the apartheid regime, South Africa had been colonized since 1652. Now, in their book titled The Theory of Racial Formation, Michael Omi and Howard Winant write, I quote here, race is a way of making up people. The very act of defining racial groups is a process fraught with confusion, contradiction, and unintended consequences. Concepts of race prove to be unreliable as supposed boundaries shift, slippages occur, realignments become evident, and new collectivities emerge. State-imposed classifications of race, for example, face continuing challenges by individuals and groups who seek to assert distinctive racial categories and identities. Historical shifts in scientific knowledge in fields ranging from physical anthropology to the genomic sciences fuel continuing debates about what race may or may not mean of human variation. Now, while reformulations regarding the concept of race in specific institutional arenas, public spaces, or academic fields, their consequences are often dramatic, reverberate broadly throughout society. Race making may also be perceived as a process of othering through the distinguishment of a group of people as other is not limited to categorizations based on race alone. The other perceived distinctions may be gender, class, sexuality, religion, culture, language, nationality, and age, as we had seen in the previous papers presented today and yesterday. Such distinctions are, according to Omi and Winant, often used to justify structures of inequality, differential treatment, subordinate status, and in some cases, violent conflict and war. The classification of people as other and the use of different attributes to classify them is unfortunately a universal phenomenon, and the necessity of categorizing people often arises. Now I'll just move on to my text. J.M. Coetzee Age of Iron has been widely discussed for its portrayal of ethics and complicity. The text, written in the form of a long letter from Elizabeth Curran, a retired professor specializing in classics, to her daughter living in the United States, writes about the implications of being a white person in apartheid South Africa. The text, which is set sometime around 1986, also exposes the manners in which racial discrimination is practiced by the government. In the text, Mrs. Curran finds out that she had to accommodate the two young daughters of her black domestic help named Florence, as well as the 15-year-old son named Becky. Florence tells her that she had to bring Becky to live with them, since all the schools in the black townships near Cape Town had to remain closed since public unrest had erupted when school children supposedly burned down their schools. Now, what surprised Mrs. Curran as much as the fact that children would burn down schools was the fact that there was nothing to be seen or read about the schools and what was happening on the radio, on television, and the newspapers as well. I quote a passage from the text here. In the world, they project all the children of the land as sitting happily at their desks, learning about the square on the hypotenuse and the parrots of the Amazonian jungle. What I know about events in Guguletu depends solely on what Florence tells me and on what I can learn by standing on the balcony and peering northeast. Namely, the Guguletu is not burning today, or if it is burning, it is burning with a low flame. Now, as a white woman, Mrs. Curran had never been truly exposed to the evils of apartheid in South Africa, but hiring Florence as her help gave her glimpses into the lives of the black community. A few hours later, they received a call informing them that Becky's friend was not at the hospital where the ambulance was supposed to have taken him. Becky proclaimed that ambulances, doctors, and police are all the same and that they all work with the government. He tells Mrs. Curran that nobody trusts the ambulance anymore and they are always talking to the police on the radios. When Mrs. Curran opposed him, he demurely tells her, "Listen and you will hear," suggesting that she, as a white woman,
has no idea what real life was like. And and Dicky says of the state police, they are not after me, they are after everybody. I have done nothing, but anybody they think they should be in school, they try to get them. We do nothing. We just say we are not going to school. Now we are waging this terror. Now they are waging this terror against us. They are terrorists. That's what Becky, the young black boy, calls the police. He calls them terrorists. When asked why he was not in school by Mrs. Curran, he questioned back, "What is school for?" And then he goes on to answer the question himself. He states, "It is to make us fit into the apartheid system." Mrs. Curran gets to understand what was going on in the minds of black youths like Becky during this conversation as he goes on to ask her, "What is more important, that apartheid must be destroyed or that I must go to school?" I'll just move on to Kodzi's next text, Disgrace, which also offers a commentary on social relations between the black and white communities of South Africa. This is this text is set in post-apartheid South Africa and is embroiled in racial tensions, which translates across in the form of violence. In his text, The Wretched of the Earth, Frantz Fanon writes that the process of decolonization is always a violent phenomenon, and in Disgrace, the process of transition from apartheid regime to democracy is marked with violence as power dynamics changes. Lucy, who is a white farm-owning woman, is brutally raped on her own farm by three black men, while her father, David Lowry, is severely wounded from the blows and beatings of those young men who left him to die after setting him on fire. They were also robbed of David's car and other belongings. Their neighbor, Mr. Ettinger, tells him, "I never go anywhere without my Beretta," which is his pistol, and he also observes that the best thing is you save yourself, because the police are not going to save you, not anymore, you can be sure. Now this is why the white man tells his fellow white, neighbors after apartheid regime. Such is the appalling failure of law enforcing agencies in the country, where people, regardless of whether they are black or white, find more comfort in arming themselves than depending on the police for their security. Now, I will quote a passage from the text where David Lowry says to himself, I quote here, "It happens every day, every hour, every minute, in every quarter of the country. Count yourself lucky to have escaped with your life. Count yourself lucky not to be a prisoner in the car at this moment, speeding away, or at the bottom of a donga with a bullet in your head. Count Lucy lucky too. It's a risk to own anything, a car, a pair of shoes, a pack of cigarettes. Not enough to go around. There are not enough cars, shoes, and cigarettes. There are too many people and too few things. What there is must go into circulation so that everyone can have a chance to be happy for a day. That is the theory. Hold to the theory and to the comforts of theory. Not human evil, just a vast circulatory system. To those workings, pity and terror are irrelevant. That is how one must see life in this country, in its schematic aspect. Otherwise one could go mad. Cars, shoes, women too." That's what David Lowry says to himself. Lucy's rape in the text becomes more complex as she refuses to report the rape to the police, even after being repeatedly asked by her father to do so. Frustrated at his constant nagging, she eventually tells him why she refuses to lay the charge for rape if he promises not to nag her again, and she tells him the reason why she refuses to tell the police of the rape is because, as far as she is concerned, what happened to her is purely private matter. In another time, in another place, it might have been held to a public matter, but in that time, in that place, it was not to be taken as a public matter. It was her business alone because it took place in South Africa. That's what Lucy tells her father. She is fully aware of the racial tensions that have culminated out of hundreds and hundreds of years of oppression of the blacks by white minority. I quote here a passage from the text. It was so personal, it was done with such personal hatred. That was what stunned me more than anything. The rest was expected, but why did they hate me so? I had never set eyes on them. I think I am in their territory. They have marked me. They will come back for me. And David offers her an answer and he tells her it was history speaking through them, a history of wrong. Both of them had no miscomprehensions about what the black population had to go through under the white government, and the act of raping Lucy has multiple layers to it. I quote a line from the text which says, it came down from the ancestors. David urges Lucy to give up her farm and to leave to start a new life elsewhere, but Lucy wanted to stay on. She tells him that if she leaves now, she would not come back, and that she wanted to stay on. Pleading with his daughter to leave, David tells her staying on would be considered an invitation for the rapist to return, but Lucy tries to make him reconsider his line of thought by posing a question back at him. Again, I quote her. Is there another way of looking at it, David? What if? What if that is the price one has to pay for staying on? Perhaps that is how they look at it. Perhaps that is how I should look at it too. They see me as owing something. They see themselves as debt collectors, tax collectors. Why should I be allowed to live here without paying? Perhaps that is what they tell themselves. In the essay, J.M. Coetzee Disgrace and the South African Pastoral, Vita Bernard and J.M. Coetzee, they write, in Coetzee's New South Africa, the urge to stake one's claim to own and to procreate is fully present. Hunger and denial. Yes.
Hi, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt, but I would request you to please
Is
wrap up
my
your
time
paper.
coming up? Okay, okay. So, that the power dynamics had changed in post-apartheid South Africa truly hit home for both David and Lucy when they realized that regardless of how humiliating it was, they had to accept that things were as it were and that they only had to look towards the future with hope. Um, Tired of the political turmoil around her and the way her life has turned out, Lucy was adamant to have peace around her, and she was prepared to do anything for peace. She was prepared to make any sacrifice for the sake of peace. Now, like many white citizens of South Africa who have come forward to own their part in the oppression of the non-white citizens of South Africa before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, many of the white characters in the select text eventually come to realize their complicity in the oppression of the blacks and find themselves living with guilt and shame. Coetzee's text may be read as a collision between private and public, intellectual and body, desire and love, public disgrace or shame, and the idea of individual grace or salvation. Okay, I think I'll wind up there. Thank you so much.
Mr. Sudarshan, Professor Sudarshan, reconnected. Would you like to wind up your paper, or shall we give you another 5 minutes? Would you like to do that? Professor Sudarshan Sabu, would you like to wind up your paper, or shall we go on to the next paper? Hello? Hello? Shall we move on to the next paper?
Yeah, yeah. How many are left?
I think two are left.
He's in the list, but I think he can't hear us.
Because he was messaging. Yeah, so
Yeah, he
so
was.
Coetzee's Age of Iron and Disgrace. This is a third paper which is just got over. As far as Coetzee, yeah, this particular novel is concerned, Age of Iron. Initially, the central character there, Mrs. Curran, uses this word for the blacks, for the blunt and the bold young men that she sees. But then what she finds is that the regime can reduce those young men to nothing. The power of the bullet, Next moment she hears of the death of Florence's 15-year-old son. Okay, yeah, we have the message from Professor Sudarshan, and he's saying that we can go on to the next paper, and the next paper is exploring the politics of race in the dispossessed in one's own land, a post-colonial eco-critical study. Very interesting. Eco-critical is what I find in the interesting study of Nadine Godimer's The Conservationist by Giffy Joseph. Please. Um, you can join Giffy. Yeah, you can take on from here. Is she audible to everyone?
No, she isn't. Not to me, at least.
Gifty, can you please bring the mic closer to your face because we can't hear you.
I think, Gifty, you need to increase the volume of your gadget, whatever you are using. Maybe you bring it closer to your mouth if it's a phone you're using. It's difficult to hear. One has to strain to actually hear you, I think.
Try adjust your volume of your device.
This is slightly better. We can hear the canine, but Aisha, I think she wants to present later. Maybe we can move on to the next participant.
Okay, the next participant is, can Pavan help me with the next, just a second, I'll have to reopen the, I haven't kept it, is about the narratives of Mumi Abu Jamal. I'm Yeah, power and cosmopolitan ethics in the narratives of Mumia Abu Jamal. Um, Ainla A, who's an independent researcher, is supposed to present this paper. Is Ainla A here? Hello? Yeah, can you take... Yeah. You can begin, Enla.
Okay. I had submitted the tentative topic Power and Cosmopolitan Ethics in the Narratives of Mumia Abu Jamal, and since this is a vast topic, I had made some slight change and made it more condensed due to time constraint. The topic for my presentation is a critique of racial crisis and power in the narratives of Mumia Abu Jamal. Okay. New ideas or findings help us form a clear understanding of the context of race and the dynamics of power and contextualize essential evidence of strategic separation which systematically attempts to dismantle narratives of prisoners' experience. This has allowed writers to speak of the birthplace of political ideology, and it is in the accuracy of Mumia's reflections that had opened doors to various discussions of resistance and separations of voice behind bars. So the main objectives of this paper is to examine opposing racial crises in the conversation between Mark Lemons Hill and Mumia Abu Jamal, and the next part where I'll be talking about the evolution of Mumia Abu Jamal's political ideology the jailhouse as a jailhouse lawyer. Mumia Abu Jamal, arrested and incarcerated in 1982 uh, for the murder of a United States police officer, has gained special significance among the ranks of African American political prisoners. Faced with systematic vilification on him by the Philadelphia criminal justice system, he has since emerged as an iconic African American political activist, gaining him the designation of the voice of the voiceless. So during his early years, much before the imprisonment, he was an award-winning Philadelphia radio journalist, but he was taken into police custody in 1981 for the murder of Philadelphia police officer Daniel Faulkner. Jamal was also a member of the Black Panther Party and a loyal advocate of the MOVE organization. Some of the books published over the years are Life from the Dead Row, Ted Bluson's Reflections from a Prisoner of Conscience, All Things Censored, Fate of Our Fathers, We Want Freedom, Alive in the Black Panther Party, Jailhouse Lawyers, Prisoners Defending Prisoners versus the USA, published in the year 2009, The Classroom and the Cell, Conversations on Black Life in America, and Writings on the Wall, Selected Prison Writings of Mumia Abu Jamal, the latest publication have a Black Lives Matter, published in the year 2017. So the incarceration of Mumia Abu Jamal has influenced many to be curious of the racial crisis as a reason for social disorder. So this in America, so this curiosity has altered the manner in which race is examined in the arena of academic research. So some of the most critical methods discussed by Abu Jamal concerns the vision for the political strife against racial crisis of oppression as well as separation. So on this issue, David Whittaker had also cited that insight that race is socially constructed and is so sweeping that by itself it implies few specific political conclusions. So it is easy to identify the objectives and roles of racial classifications, but the approach to battle this racism is in the post-racial era cannot be easily determined. So the question is, what can be the possibility of reforms in racial justice, or what are the unseen reasons behind much of these racial differences? So all these answers to the questions are provided through two different lenses, which is race, another which is mass incarceration. And this itself is discussed in the conversation between Mark Lemons and Mumia Abu Jamal in the book Classroom and the Cell, Conversations of Black Life in America. So in the introduction of the book, um, Lemon Hill identifies some similar themes by evaluating the ways through which blacks were bound by the same social system of politics and community structure. He cites that both of us are black men from North Philadelphia, lifelong activists and fathers, that we are both a mere 3 generations from slavery, living in an era more remarkable than our forebears could ever have dreamed. So though he mentions about the advancement of African Americans in the influential public force, it also indicates a move towards a racial justice. So he fails to fully appreciate the political victory that tends to critique failure of democracy. He also writes that we are sobered by the reality that black men represent the lowest percentile of college students, as well as the highest percentage of state and federal prisoners. So Marx's attempt for black freedom desires at the same time Black prosperity that arises from increasing Americans' unity in the midst of racial anxiety. Hence, he draws the questions regarding Black life in the post-racial era. Uh, as in, what does it mean to be Black, alive, and resistant in the 21st century? Or how can we reimagine the two major spaces that impact Black life? First, which is the classroom, and second, which is the prison cell. So, in the chapter titled "Who Am I? Whose Am I?", Mark poses questions on Abu Jamal and his personal life, his life in the prison, the influence of political ideologies of African American revolutionaries, and his own understanding. Abu Jamal's answers uh, also discloses his application to his community before and after his imprisonment, in the sense that before his imprisonment, he was actively involved in the Black Panther Party and MOVE organization. And he emphasizes Newton's assertion as well, where he quotes "I am we." So this becomes an extension of that identity that appears in the similar essay, "A Black View of Prison," where another writer, Ahmad Al-Azbatu, also has insisted that there are guiding aspects to determine the causes or mode of reaction. In the sense, the middle and the lower class prisoners experiences to this state of incarceration, which is first, which is the sociological background, second, which is the atmosphere of the prison, institutionalization, the length of the sentence in the prison, and the distance and the immediate hope relative to this release from the prison. So he claims that in order to institutionalize a person, his basic sense of self must be eradicated. This inmate is constantly reminded that he is part of a community whose needs transcend his own, and in a sense, which is true. So Abu Jamal says, being in prison for one's political belief and resistance is as normal as pancakes for breakfast. So this itself is a sufficient evidence that the present criminal justice system is implanted in racial crisis. Certain aspects beyond racism also trigger functions of prison as a violence mechanism in racial profiling. And this rise in the rate of incarceration in the United States has been ongoing since the end of 1960s, and Mark claims that prison has become a part of my life. I knew I didn't want to go to the prison, but I never thought it was completely avoidable. So at an imaginable degree, mass incarceration is firmly connected to the reaction of privileges and rights for the blacks. And in Mark's opinion as well, the year 1970s, there was an increase of more than 2 lakh American prisoners, and at present, after 3 decades, the rate of population has risen to 2.5 million, and some 7.7 million prisoners dominated by the criminal justice system. So, in the similar note, Alexander also writes that few would guess that prison's population reached from approximately 350,000 to 2.3 million in such a short period of time due to changes in law and politics and not changes in the crime rates. So this means that one should focus on the main aspects of the foundation of racial classification. It does mainly in the aspects of analyzing racial crisis. So all of this gives a consideration to ignore aspects of racial issue. As Mark asserts, being black increases your chance of being detained, arrested, charged, convicted, sentenced, and executed more than any other racial group in the nation. So discussing this claim in the book Jailhouse Lawyers, Prisoners Defending Prisoners versus the USA, he also reveals how the Salad Bar was one part of the 27-page complaint about the range of problems, including unhealthy ventilations, overcrowding, rodents, failure to segregate prisoners with contagious diseases, and complete absence of nutritious food. So raising these problems in prison as a severe racial issue is one major challenge. becomes those are some major challenges, and prison confines the outcast group and the underprivileged into a socially impaired community, so outside the limits of the society to be concerned, and undoubtedly beyond the ability of the state to improve, in the sense that increase in the rate of imprisonment neglects basic needs of the prisoners. So in the similar note, Angela Davis in Our Prisons Obsolete also coined the term mass incarceration as a social problem through her activism for change and reform. There are many known factors for these reforms. More accurately, Davis switched to the problems of governing through issues to suggest that war on drugs has raised as an growing factor alongside mass incarceration. So, to an extent, these reforms could alter the state and laws while promoting the carceral systems to provide for health, security, and well-being of the prisoners. So there are currently more people with mental and emotional disorders. That's what she quotes in her text, in jails and prisons than in mental institutions. So there is something more behind these ideas of reforms, especially if mass incarceration means nothing more than changing strategies that do not discuss the nature of crime at all. So the history of the American legality and black struggle under the law has always been questionable. So with this in mind, he writes that laws that preserve inequality controlled them in the past, and he further adds the racialization of specific crimes meant that according to state law, mm, there were crimes for which only the blacks could be duly convicted. Um, this leads us to examine the attributes of this American law. So, the legal domination is the essential foundation of the bureaucratic administration on which not only the modern state but also the modern capitalism depends, which is what scrutiny says. But furthermore, there were several political policies that restricted many of the African Americans to take part in political activities, and he criticizes that. Abu Jamal criticizes that, and it is in the 1837 case of Hobbes versus Polk, Pennsylvania law, which made it illegal for blacks to vote. And moreover, discussion concerning the problem of the law and courts in America is defined by issue of some major social problems besides problems with the suffrage. So one among such problem is the rise in the crime rates among African Americans also emerges to be one obvious reason. And he reiterates that the racialization of specific crimes meant that according to uh, uh, yes, that the authorization of, in the sense that the policies of the prison would mean authorization of crime. And one crucial features of the American criminal justice system is the insensitivity of the way that they have addressed problems of prisoners' conditions despite unfavorable effect of the criminal justice system. So we clearly understand that Prison Litigation Reform Act (PLRA) includes continuous assault of the rights of the prisoners to obtain assistance from the courts to have taken or defied their fundamental rights. And he focuses on this right to voice out African American case efficiently. Um, and in discussions of the BLRA issue in the essay Not So Sweet, Questions by 16-Year-Olds, he or here at the center
Ainul,
emphasizes, yes,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but you will have to conclude your paper. Actually, we have paucity of time. Okay. So
all right,
I'm extremely
uh,
sorry to interrupt, but please
just
conclude your
conclude
paper.
just one paragraph. So, okay, so in many cases, there is these conditions of solitary confinement that initiates such visions of obstacles of being denied of one's constitutional rights. And jailhouse lawyers were mainly targeted by police or prison officials because they were also penalized for working on many occasions. It includes this rising complex systems that make black prisoners in the cell and even in the solitary confinement to realize the legal systems clearly. So in the concluding note, um, I will address that, of course, the interrelationship between black prisoners happiness is determined by your own common struggle. However, as concerning the law of the jailhouse lawyers, one need to think what are the effects of this jailhouse lawyers in the life of other helpless prisoners. Because for Abu Jamal, it is the imprisonment of the majority of African Americans. So for many of these jailhouse lawyers, they acquired the information of the fellow prisoners and usually comes to a closet that they were accused. Told it is right or wrong, but they realize that they share the same situation. All right. So, in Patricia O'Connor's words, similar to the desire to connect with family and community, inmates join groups, especially those that offer educational and vocational training in prison, which has also correlated with increased educational proficiency. Yeah.
I think.
Thank you.
Would do we have time for this paper? I think Joseph could not make a presentation. Um, yes, Pavan, is she there?
Yes, I'm here. Am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible, Giffy.
Aisha,
So may I
there was also
begin?
another person on the in the chat box, Mr. Sahu, who was
Yeah, but I think we've given him time, so we have only 10 minutes.
when our next session, our valedictory session begins at 3:30. So could you just
Yeah,
shorten it? Just give us an encapsulated version of your paper. I'm really, really sorry, but we're running, against time now. So you just
yeah.
have something around 5 minutes, 5 to 6 minutes.
Okay.
Just give us the
Okay.
bullet points. Yeah.
Postcolonial ecocratism is a mode of reading that works towards confirming an ecological ethic that finds environmental justice, social justice, and economic justice as parts of the same whole. It emphasizes the need for an altered relation between man, animal, and environment. It has a role of advocacy in relation to the real world it dwells. So, viewing environmental literature from a critical perspective may contribute to the decay of philosophical hierarchies and barriers which are explicit in situations forged by colonialism. Postcolonial ecocratism also assumes economic significance in the contemporary world by questioning the euphemized form of imperialism that is globalization. And we can say that Nathan Godimer's The Conservationist is an anti-pastoral. It is because pastoral is generally Eurocentric in nature, and this Eurocentrism is challenged in this novel. Here we find Mehring, the owner, as an outsider, and when he becomes the outsider, we can be found out that he is of German origin, and he is also the descendant of a colonizer. As a result, we can see that Mehring is totally an outsider in the context of the novel. Another thing is that the 400-acre farm in this novel is the true protagonist. Mehring, the white anti-hero, is not the real protagonist of the novel. And South Africa, which is a land of uneven economic and social backgrounds, exposes different kinds of conservation. The forced conservationism of Godimer's white anti-hero is contrasted against the true acceptance of natural realities of the black farm workers. And Mehring is exceedingly distant from the realities of the farm. Mehring's mind keeps constantly migrating to conferences in Tokyo, to luncheons with affluent friends, and to the comforts of urban settings. And another important thing we find in this novel is environmental imperialism, which has aspects like subjugation of native land, imposition of exotic livestock and alien agricultural methods, ruthless exploitation of the natural resources, etc. And we also have an aspect called environmental racism. The exploitation and discrimination of race is inextricably associated with the exploitation of nature. In Terry's letter to Mehring, the blacks are called kafirs. In 2005, Dean Curtin, an American environmental philosopher, defined environmental racism as the connection of race and environment, so that the oppression of one is connected to and supported by the oppression of the another. And we also find aspects like biocolonization, continuing poverty, environmental degradation, and the violation of human rights. All and for capitalists, the ball is development, their goal is development, and there is no concern for environment. All these aspects are presented here, and there is also the idea of speciesism, where where one species is given more dominance than other species. So the idea of speciesism is critiqued in the novel, because the anti-hero Mehring sees cows as stupid creatures staring at him, and such aspects are critiqued in the novel. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a
Gifty.
lot to
Yeah.
Giffy. I think we can open the session to questions and deliberations, comments, whatever.
We just
And
have
how
five
much
minutes
time do we
left.
have?
We
Okay,
just have 5 minutes.
5 minutes
We don't
for.
have more than that because
We
we
can take
spent
one, two or three
two
questions,
questions.
not
Two
more than that.
questions, but I
Two.
don't see
Okay,
anything in the
fine.
chat box.
Okay, there is nothing in the chat box.
So if there is nothing in the chat box, and if you want to make your comments, then why don't you, as a chair, make your comments? That will be better.
Thank you for this wonderful session. I think I made a comment after each and every paper except
And that's
the
fine.
last.
That's fine. Then
Um,
we ask that
yeah,
Pawan to take over to conclude
fine. You
the
can ask
session.
Pawan to.
Is
Yeah,
that okay? He will
fine.
then thank you. If you
Yeah.
have to say something, do say as the chair, and otherwise Pawan will thank you and conclude it
No,
formally.
no. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. We had a wide range of papers. Sadly, we could not give as much time as was allotted to the other papers to as much to Giffy Joseph. But I think that's regular norm in there are always connection issues whenever there are such presentations going on. Thank you, Brati. Thank you to the Evening College for giving me this opportunity to be a part of this conference. I thoroughly enjoyed this session, and we move on to the valedictory.
Before that, I think Pawan
Welcome.
will formally conclude it.
Okay.
Pawan, and thanks Aisha for being there for us. Thank you. Yes, Pawan.
Okay, ma'am. I wish we had more time to continue this discussion, but because of the paucity of time, we will have to draw the session to a close. And I would like to extend my gratitude to Professor Irfan for conducting this session in such an erudite manner, and also for bringing her insights and suggestions to the session. And a big thanks to all our presenters for such insightful papers. I am sure all the participants will agree that this session was worth every minute of their time, and we all stand enriched at the end of it. I would also like to request all our participants to be present at the valedictory session, and we will also be providing the feedback form during the valedictory session, and it will be great if all of you could fill it up. Thanks again, and thanks to all.
I has Professor Geeta. Welcome, Professor Asaduddin, our chair for this session. Welcome, Professor Shubono Chatterjee. And has Professor Geeta Bajaj joined?
Good evening, Brati. Hi, Shubarno.
Good
Good to
evening,
see
sir.
you.
Good evening, sir. It's, though we're meeting on the virtual platform, it's a pleasure to meet with my MPhil batchmate Shubarno here.
Hi, brother.
Hi. It's always been a pleasure. Geeta is, I think, has not yet joined, Professor Geeta Bajaj, but uh, can we begin the session, sir? Because she has been traveling. So I think I will begin with the introduction.
We
Shall
have
I?
1 minute yet. I think it's 3:20, 3:29. So
So let's wait. Officially, let's wait till 3:30 and then I'll begin. Because just off the record, Professor Bajaj has been trainer. She traveled back to Dubai to yesterday night, and she had a lot of problems with that RT-PCR, and I think she arrived at early morning 5 o'clock. So it's pretty little hassled. So Shubhanu, if you go first and then she can follow, is that okay? Professor
Yeah,
Asaduddin, it's okay
that's
enough.
fine. If Asad, if it is okay with you.
Absolutely fine.
Okay.
How are you?
I'm good. Let's not rush.
Yes, yes. I am in no hurry.
We have ample time. We have kept given ourselves ample time. This is anyway valedictory session, so we can begin at leisure. So I'm waiting for Professor Geeta Bajaj to officially join us. Because sometimes there are network issues there too. Have all the participants joined? Not yet. I think they're joining in.
I think
Welcome,
Professor Bajaj
Professor
is
Geeta
here.
Bajaj.
Good afternoon, Dr. Prati. Thank you for having me here.
And thank you, despite such a hectic schedule, traveling, yet you have come on board. Kudos to you and your academic commitment. So, officially, shall I begin? Then I'll begin
Yes,
with a brief
thank you.
welcome. Um, I welcome our esteemed chair and speaker of the valedictory session, Professor Mohammad Asaduddin, Dr. Geeta Bajaj, and Professor Shabana Chatterjee. Professor Pavan Kumar Sharma, our principal, Dancing Evening College, dear colleagues, faculty members, presenters, and participants, students, and our well-wishers. A very good afternoon to all. Let me take this honor to welcome each and every one of you to the valedictory session of the two-day conference on resistance and revolutions, the politics of marginality, organized by the Department of English, the Singh Evening College, University of Delhi. Over the course of the last 2 days, we have had deep insights into the concept of marginality, its intersections with caste, class, gender, and identity. We have listened to and discussed, deliberated, reflected on some very thought provoking talks from our plenary speakers to our presenters from across the country. And now, the valedictory session, we have with us three very distinguished and illustrious academicians who will speak to us. May I introduce the audience to Professor Mohammad Asaduddin, who will chair the valedictory session. Professor Asaduddin is from the Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia. He was advisor to the Vice Chancellor, an advisor, sorry, he's advisor to the Vice Chancellor, Academics and Research. He has also held several administrative posts over the course of the years, including Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Languages, Director of Academic Affairs, Director of Center for Comparative Religions and Civilizations, and Director of Jamia's Centenary History Project. He is also the recipient of many prestigious awards, including Crossword Book Award for A Life in Words Memoirs, translation of Kagzi Hai Pehrahan by Ismat Chugtai 2013, Fulbright Fellowship, Senior to the USA 2008 to 9, Sahitya Academy, International Academy of Letters Award 2004, and the Charles Wallace Trust Fellowship to UK 2000. He has also been the visiting professor to several universities abroad and part of several international and national projects. His areas of interest and specialization include world literature in original and translation, literature and culture in Islam, Dalit literature, Urdu studies, literary historiography, language politics, and language issues. He has several publications to his name, some of which are Premchand, Complete Stories, Volume 1 to 4, 2017, Premchand in World Languages, Translation, Reception, and Cinematic Representations, 2016, Filming Fiction, Tagore, Premchand, and Roy, edited with Anuradha Ghosh. So we extend our sincere thanks and appreciation for being with us here this afternoon. I would like to introduce Professor Geeta Bajaj, who will be one of our speakers for this session. She is a Harvard Business School affiliate, a certified NLP practitioner, and a certified inner metrics coach. At present, Dr. Bajaj is professor at IMT Dubai, adjunct faculty IE, School of Human Sciences and Technology, Madrid, Spain, and visiting faculty Indian Institute of Management, IIM Sambalpur. With 12 years of industry and 18 years of academic experience, she is now member Board of Studies, AIMA, Center for Management Education, and editorial board member, India Case Research Center. Dr. Bajaj has received prestigious awards for her research work, case writing, and inometrics profiling. She has co-edited one book, or co-authored and co-authored 20 cases and research papers, and more than 200 newspaper articles. Dr. Bajaj has been in several leadership roles, including as founder editor HT Horizons, the education supplement of Hindustan Times, India, and chairperson of the flagship MBA program of MDI Gurgaon and the dual country MBA program of IMT Ghaziabad, Dubai. Thank you, Dr. Bajaj, for accepting our invitation to be a speaker at our plenary. We would love looking forward to your talk. Professor Chatterjee, our next speaker on the panel, heartfelt gratitude for coming on board at a very short notice. Professor Shubhana Chatterjee is professor in the Department of English, University of Delhi. He has also taught in Japan and Wales. He was Fulbright Senior Research Fellow at La Salle University, Philadelphia, 2004 to 5, recipient of Kluge Postdoctoral Fellowship at Library of Congress in 2006, and awarded an academic writing residency at the Rockefeller Foundation, Bellagio Center, Italy. He was a member of the core group for a British Academy networking project with the Open University on globalization, identity politics, and social conflict, and coordinating member of Prospects for English Studies India and Britain Compared. His publications include The Distant Shores of Freedom, Vietnamese American Memoirs and Fiction 2019, Reconsidering English Studies in Indian Higher Education, co-authored 2015, Tracking the Media Interpretations of Mass Media Discourses in India and Pakistan 2008, Memoirs of a Lost War, American Poetic Responses to the Vietnam War 2001, is co-editor of the Hoot Reader Media Practice in 21st Century India 2013, Globalization in India, Contents and Discontents, and an anthology of Indian prose writings in English 2004. I now hand over the mic and the session to Professor Mohammed Asaduddin. Thank you, sir, and thank you all for coming on board.
Brati, could you please explain about the format of the session? For example, do we have question answer after every lecture, and who would pick up the questions?
Question answer sessions, if you we can take them together or we can take them after. I think both the papers are completely different. Both the presentations are completely different, so I think we can take them after each presentation.
Right.
That I think would be better, and we can coordinate if you want. We can depute a teacher to coordinate the questions. Who will we'll ask them to put the questions in the chat box.
Right, that will be great.
Yeah, we'll put the questions in the chat box. We've been doing this is the what practice we've been following. Anybody who has a question can please type it in the chat box so that it will be convenient for us to see it from there. And if it's okay, then Shubhanu can go first, and we can reverse the order which we had planned, so Geeta can get a little bit of respite time. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Right. Yes. Welcome on my personal behalf as well to the two distinguished speakers and all the listeners who have logged in. May I request Professor Shubhana Chatterjee to make his presentation.
Thank you, Asad, and it's good to see you. And thank you, Brati. I have a few slides, text on slides. Let me see if I can present them.
Did you share them with us?
I did. I have them
so
on
then
my.
We can run it if you want, or you can run it because if we run, there's a little bit of slightly time lag of 5 seconds.
Okay, I'm just trying it now.
Otherwise, we can do it from our side.
Yeah, let me just try.
Right.
If it doesn't work, then I'll request you.
We have it ready. If you there's a problem, we can run it. Shall we try?
Okay, I think that might be. I don't know what's happened at my
Let's try. Let's try.
end. I think it's better if you try it. Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying. I've asked the.
Just 1 minute. Can you see?
Not yet. Your screen is. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. Perfect.
Okay. Now the. Sorry about this, but now I can't see anything. But never mind. As long as you can see it. Yeah. Now I can. Yeah.
No, no, you can if you minimize your screen. We can see you and you can see your screen.
Just give me.
No issues.
Half a
No issues.
minute.
Take your time.
Okay. So you can see, and yeah, for some reason I cannot see, which is very strange.
Tech team, can you help? Explain.
Sir, if you could just pin the screen where you see the slideshow, it will enlarge itself. If you just click on it, there is an option. There is a pin.
Pin. Where is the pin?
Yeah, I clicked on that. Well, never mind. Can you see?
We can see.
Okay.
We can see
So I
the
just
screen and we can see you and we can hear you.
okay. So I think that is more than enough.
Okay.
If I except that I don't know what I am presenting, so that is the problem.
Okay. But if we present, can you? Then we can present and you let us present.
Yeah. Okay.
Let us present.
So I'll
Sumudra will present and then it will be easier for you also, right?
yeah.
Sumudra, why don't you present?
Sumadra, yeah. Thank you for
No, no, we
yes.
kept it that on standby. Because
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
welcome.
Thank you, Sumandara, and hello. Okay, so sorry for wasting your time. Let me begin right away.
We
This
have all
is
the time now.
okay. This is part of my work on Vietnamese American literature, which is as quite far removed from the papers that you have had presented to you. But perhaps in terms of the thematics of belonging and identity and home, it might have some relation to what you have been dealing with. So, as you can see, this is a memoir and a travelogue by Andrew Pham called Cat and Mandala. And it deals with, as I will point out, his journeys through American and Vietnamese landscapes. But these landscapes are merely a kind of background, if you will, for the transformation of the self. And that is what I will try to highlight very quickly here. Andrew Pham's reflections on identity and belonging are triggered by an encounter. Yes, thank you. Are triggered by an encounter with an American Vietnam veteran by the name of Tile, who, having abandoned his wife and two boys, lives in the Mexican desert. And he asks Pham for forgiveness. And this is from the text: "Forgive me for what I have done to your people." And part of Pham's response, which is on your screen, highlights the ambiguous relationship between the refugee immigrant self and its others, especially since that self is identified by Tile purely in ethnic terms. And the questions that he asks: who are my people? Are you, that is Tile, my people? How can you be my people? And so on. Yeah. Sumatra, if you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. This is that sense of liminality that he expresses throughout the memoir. I move through your world a careful visitor, respectful and mindful, hoping for but not believing in the day I become native. I am the rootless one, yeah, yet still the beneficiary of all of your and all of their sufferings. So, who are my people complicates the monolithic, monochromatic identity asserted by tile, since it moves outside the defined space of Vietnameseness based primarily on war experience. The US intervention in Vietnam is central to this definition, as the country, its peoples, cultures, and refugees are seen primarily through the prism of the conflict and its outcomes. Pham acknowledges this when he says he's the beneficiary of all your sufferings and all of their sufferings, and that his rootlessness is a consequence of war. Being uprooted leads not only to the question of allegiance and identification, but to questions of home and homelessness. Where is home? Is the birthplace over there home? Or is the place here where one resides home? While living and holding a citizenship here, how should the relation to homeland politics over there be defined? So the spatiality of here and there is somewhat simplistic and complicated by temporal, cultural, historical specificities. The conceptualization of the self and its relation to community and home, as Stuart Hall points out, is historicized because I quote from Stuart Hall, cultural identities come from somewhere, have histories. But like everything that is historical, they undergo constant transformation. Far from being eternally fixed in some essentialized past, they are subject to the continuous play of history, culture, and power. So, Tile apologizing to Pham is directed at the representative of a fixed cultural and political category, whereas Pham's response opens up the fissure of what constitutes his sense of my people. Sorry, can you go back? Yeah, okay, doesn't matter. One category that obviously defines Pham's people, is that of the Vietnamese American, a hybrid term encompassing countries of origin and arrival, but such a coupling is always uneasy in its artificial stabilization of shifting allegiances and senses of the self and community. And Pham is conscious of this uneasiness as he observes his parents. This is Pham writing about his parents on your screen. Yeah? I see their groveling humility, concessions given before quarters asked. I hate their slitty measuring eyes. Yet I know I am as vulnerable as they before the big boned, fair skinned white Americans. So Stuart Hall's play of history, culture, and power is explicitly articulated as Pham sees his parents negotiate white structures of power and attempting to fit into a predominant frame of the Oriental other. Pham is not, however, as distant from that vulnerable othering as the narrative makes clear, and that places him within a matrix of foreignness. As Mia Tuan argues in the context of Chinese and Japanese immigrants in America, I quote from Tuan, while white ethnics are free to discard their ethnic links and merge with the American mainstream after the first generation, Asian ethnics do not have this option. An assumption of foreignness stubbornly clings to them, irrespective of their generational status. The assumption of foreignness is related most obviously to ethnicity, an assumption of codes of expected behavior, as in the case of Pham's parents. But it also arises out of what Tuan calls the whites, and I'm quoting again from Tuan, sense of proprietary claim to being the real Americans. The question, therefore, where are you from originally, that Tile asks, is not innocent of this proprietary claim, as it implies an otherness that is outside of white structures of being American. and otherness also implied in Tyle's apology to your people and Farm's question, who are my people? These questions animate Farm's journey to Vietnam as he looks to think about and possibly reconcile the gaps between the here and the there as a Vietnamese refugee brought up in America. Before going further into Farm's text, it might be worth considering briefly some arguments that the critic Arif Dirlik made in a 2002 essay, Bringing History Back In, of Diasporas, Identities, Places, and Histories. Here, Dirlik offers a scathing and valuable critique of the ways in which diasporas and hybridity have been conceptualized. The category of Asian American, for instance, is conflated with Asian, so that Asian Americans can be construed as bridges to Asia, cultural interpreters. Dirlik points to the way, and here I'm quoting, I think it's on the slide, maybe, I don't know. Can you just go to the next slide, please, Sumadra? No, sorry, it's not there, but I'll just read it. Hybridity in its abstraction serves not to illuminate, but to disguise social inequality and exploitation by reducing to a state of hybridity all who may be considered marginal, covering up the fact that there is a great deal of difference between different marginalities. Indeed, the excerpt about his parents from Farm's memoir heightens our awareness of the variated multiplicities of marginal identity within a single familial frame, at the same time that it highlights equations of power and inequality. Dirlik takes up Bakhtin's idea of intentional hybridity and his stress on the illumination of one consciousness by another, which unites the contestants in their very contest in what Dirlik calls a unity of opposites, which he says is reminiscent readily of the dialectical notion of contradiction, which in many ways is preferable over the term hybridity itself because it allows for the same open-endedness as hybridity, while remaining attentive to questions of historicity and concreteness. Dirlik highlights not only the ahistoricity into which hybridity may fall, but that diasporic consciousness has no history, and that one of the dangerous consequences of undue attention to diasporas is to distance the so-called diasporic populations from their immediate environments, to render them into foreigners in the context of everyday life. Thus, the assumption of foreigners articulated by Tuan is not only a function of power relations and hierarchies, but also reinforced in cultural and academic discourse, which abstracts the diasporic from the everyday. We need to keep in mind, however, that it is in the everyday that foreignness is reenacted through what Mary Louise Pratt calls the contact zone, where the Asian body becomes what she calls a zone of contact when it appears under the American Orientalist gaze in front of racist stares. So the mimesis of the Oriental, enacted by Farm's parents, is an internalization and an anticipation of the pressures of the contact zone. And as I said earlier, Farm is not immune to that gaze or the bodily presences and differences, big boned, fair skinned white Americans that make him foreign. So Farm's search for home and for his people occurs within such conflicted domains. And as we shall see, his narrative moves between an awareness of contraries as well as a desire to flatten difficult terrains of experience, memory, and history. Dirlik is particularly scathing about what he calls a whimpering preoccupation with the location of home. And he writes that, I quote, what is important is to enable people to feel at home where they live. This does not, he says, require that people abandon their legacies, only that they recognize the historicity of their cultural identities and that these identities are subject to change in the course of historical encounters. At one level, this is an unexceptionable argument. requiring a move away from the nostalgic recoveries of home to a historically informed continuum of the self. In order to feel at home where they live, without falling into the trap of the search for origins, one could, however, conceptualize home not as an end in itself, or as Andrea Ritavoy puts it, a passive destination which will magically engender feelings of belonging, but as a process of historicizing oneself in singular or multiple locations. However problematic the search for home and belonging may be, and in Pham's journey they are so, that search enables us to think further about the category of the Vietnamese American, as well as questions of return. The idea of home and that of return are intertwined in accounts by many Vietnamese refugees. Win Long, contemplating escape from Vietnam after release from a re education camp, writes, "Nothing is more important than freedom. As for losing their homeland, the Vietnamese regard the loss as temporary." Similarly, Sumudra, this is the next slide. Similarly, this is an extract from a book for children, The Little Weaver of Tai Yen Village, where the author Tan Kien Tuet writes, "For most of us, our journey to North America has been a trauma," and you can read the rest on your screen. And what she's pointing to is that the idea of exile as a temporary state of disruption. Now, this was common among refugees because home is imagined as having been temporarily wrenched, momentarily wrenched. And everyday living in America doesn't approximate to that idea of permanence with which Vietnam is imagined. There is another Vietnamese refugee by the name of Win Ki Duc who writes of his first days in the US, and I quote, "We were refugees, desperate for a link to our homeland, nursing our wounds of defeat with the faint notion of a peaceful future. The American churches, charities, and families that sponsored us did all they could to welcome us and physical comfort. What they couldn't give us was our own sense of home." So to feel at home where one lives, as Dirlik argues, is necessary to avoid the evacuation of history within which the self is located. But to feel at home is not always or necessarily a smooth or a smooth process, nor is it a process that has a fixed terminus. The trauma of separation is as much a part of the legacy of the refugee self as it is life, as is life in the new world and the sense of dislocation that is so much a part of the historicization of the self. Now, Andrew Pham, in his memoir, offers a nuanced account of what motivates Vietnamese in America to go back to Vietnam. And this is the text, the quote on your screen. I'll just read that first line. "For some of us, by returning as tourists, we prove to ourselves that we are no longer Vietnamese, but Vietnamese Americans. Yeah? We are now the victors, no longer the poverty-stricken refugees clinging to fishing boats, spilling out of cargo planes, etc." And the next slide, please. This is the continuation of the quote. Yeah. "Time has veiled the days when America fished us out of the ocean like drowning cockroaches, etc. Mostly we return because we are lost." Quite clearly, this is not a standard nostalgic return to spaces of belonging, the return which is worth suffering and waiting for. Yet it is a strange moment of transition, transformation, and triumph. Return transmutes the self into a different kind of foreignness, that of the Vietnamese American and Viet that is burdened not by the conflicts of the contact zones in America, but a zone of superiority based on immersion in networks of capital and consumption. From howling, poverty stricken refugees and drowning cockroaches images of mass degradation, helplessness, and dehumanization. The returning Vietnamese American has become an object of envy, retrieving a tenuous dignity through unbelonging. What are also retrieved are histories of loss and victory in war, displacement, and exile, and that the category Vietnamese American is freighted with all these. Interestingly, Vietnamese refugees are defined as the owners of their tragedy, American tragedy, as if South Vietnamese involvement in what was also a civil war and consequent losses and responsibilities can be forgotten. The focus on American involvement in rescue if not in war further diminishes the agency of the South Vietnamese. By diminishment of South Vietnamese agency, I do not imply that the millions who fled Vietnam were not making choices, but that their fleeing is extricated from South Vietnamese histories of loss, betrayal, corruption, and US intervention. The complicated registers of what seems to me an attempt to exorcise the ghosts of ignominious escape are only partially acknowledged in the final statement. Mostly we return because we are lost. The losses are at many levels: loss of home, homeland, country, dignity, identity, war. And the admission undermines the confidence of the returning Viet Q, highlighting not triumph, but multiple displacements. The sentence also gestures to the hope that undergirds journeys of return, the hopes of homeliness, belonging, salvation, not in actuality, but in the imagined returns that Win Qui Duc and Thuet articulate. Thus, the futurity of return is rejected as a redemptive one, marked by historical and individual erasures and closure. As the end of the announce to what he will do when he returns to the US, he will be a better American. Just 1 minute, please. I need to charge my laptop. Remember the rhetorical between that of fraught, as I've been saying, with that height the idea of being better American. Pass the memoir with levity. He said, bygone reconciliation. His contact with the indicates the inevitable distinction between nostalgia for child and unrealization. So next slide, please. Thank you. Sorry. I think can you hear now? Because my screen froze for some time.
We can hear you
okay.
now.
Thank you, Asad. This is there is some problem. Okay. So yeah, the
We can hear. Oh, I think he's lost the. I think he's lost the connection.
Yeah, I think he's rejoined. Let me check.
Brati, Pavan, Samudra, is there any message from Subarno?
I had a word with him. He's rejoining. He's
Okay,
rejoining. I just had a word with him.
no problem.
He's rejoining from the phone through the phone, I guess. I'll just resend him the link if that is possible. These are the technological glitches on an online conference.
All right. We have to
I
be.
am so I am always I'm pretty technophobic, so I
Mhm.
don't know. Technology seems to desert you at the right moment.
All right.
It's both. I think it is both. It enables and disables sometimes.
All right. So one has to be patient.
Yes, I've WhatsApped him the link again,
Mhm.
so if he can join from the phone
Yeah.
too. Since this is the last session, so we have time, so nothing to worry. I just hope. Yeah, I have mailed him. I have WhatsApped him.
If you send him too many messages, he will be more nervous. Yeah, he's there. He's there.
Is there, right? Right.
Welcome to Borno.
Welcome back.
I'm sorry about this.
That's okay. It's part and
Okay.
parcel of the.
I don't know what happened. It just okay. So let me now. I'm coming to the end. I hope soon. So this extract, as I was trying to say, this is the epitome, I think, of Dirlik, what Dirlik calls whimpering preoccupation with the location of home, the outcome of a refusal to contend with time and history. The estrangement that Pham feels is painful and has revelatory potential to construe the self, its pasts and presents, not as fixed or immutable, but as protean and mired in time and place. A glimpse of this mutable self is available once in the narrative when Pham writes, I think it's in the next slide, Sumatra, I'm not sure. Yes. I am quick and deft. I am a chameleon. And the best chameleon, as he says, has no center. The moment of recognition opens possibilities of reconfiguring categories of American, Vietnam, Vietnamese American, as entangled in histories of war and invasion, militarism, and Cold War politics. It is also a recognition of the liminality of the narrating, memorializing self, defined as it is by what another critic, Hong Kam Tai, calls bipolar marginality, the sense of being on the margins of two cultures. Yet this moment is fearful and fleeting, and Pham returns to the more comforting nostrum, be a better American. The axis of bipolar marginality are revealed in the uneasy negotiation between being American and Viet Kieu identity. This is the next slide, please, Samudra. This is what the Vietnamese tell him. The Viet Kieu are the lottery winners. Yeah? America has it all, owns it all, and nowhere else are we safer than in America. The sight of my roots repulses me, and this shames me deeply. As noted earlier, foreignness as expatriate Vietnamese confers status and privilege. The losers in war now prized as lottery winners. The payoff is not only linked with American economic power, but safety, a conflation that is curious at best, given the precarity of refugee life in the US, a living on the edge that Pham's father reminds him of when he says, don't ever think America is yours. It isn't. Perhaps this anxiety drives Pham to Vietnam and the muck of Vietnam. There are innumerable passages in the memoir where the poverty and degradation of everyday life in Vietnam are highlighted. And this is what pushes him to valorize life in the US. Viet Thanh Nguyen, in his essay Refugee Memories and Asian American Critics, thank you, suggests a reworking of W.E.B. Du Bois' notion of double consciousness to highlight a network of power lines that explicate the position of minorities in multicultural America. This is what Nguyen writes. Minorities can no longer only see themselves as both self and other. They must also see themselves as both disadvantaged in some circumstances when at home and advantaged in some circumstances when abroad. The American minority's new burden is a revised double consciousness, an awareness of how a multicultural United States packs a two-fisted punch of diversity and domination as it struggles to keep its power, its grip on hegemonic power. And the rest of the quote is on the next slide. Yeah. Asian Americans, he says, are not exempt from this problem. If anything, they are deeply implicated in the exercise of US power through their increasing importance as cultural ambassadors, global corporate citizens, transnational commuters, and model minorities. America has it all, owns it all, even if its power is diminished. And Pham's desire to seek shelter within that domain highlights the paradox of minorities who take solace from that power and its validations in their former homeland. While Pham's text opens up possibilities of exploring the contraries created by the power line, it is significant that he does not follow through and interrogate American power and his complicity within that frame. Rather, he seeks solace within the structures of power that sustain the American imperium and create wars such as the one in Vietnam. Perhaps Palm's reaction is, as Michael Seidel argues, part of the exilic condition. It is common enough, even in actual cases of exilic return, that the mental energy expended on the image of home in absence proves incommensurate with the reality of home as presence. So Pham repulsion, the sense of shame that he feels at the reality of home as presence, is accompanied by shame, and the narrative is marked by guilt, which is partially explicable in terms of presence and absence. Pham is not only ashamed at his reaction, which is indicative of the distance he's traveled from idealizations of home, but he also seems ashamed of Vietnam per se, of his Vietnamese origins, of having left the country, of having returned in search of salvation. The normativizing of Vietnamese poverty is without any context. He does not mention the impact of the war or US sanctions on post-war Vietnam. This normativizing coexists with emphasis on US economic wealth, the Midas quality of which transforms him into a lottery winner, fortunate to have fled to environments. Guilt and pride at having escaped the poverty and grime of Vietnam coexist, threatening to destabilize the telos of arrival and returns desired by Pham. And the narrative is occasionally conscious of the costs and consequences of positioning oneself as Vietnamese American. The next slide, please, Sumadra. Yes. No, the next one. Yeah, this is the one. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So he sees the costs. Yeah. We rarely admit even to ourselves the circumstances and the cost of our being here. The erasure of difficult histories in which Pham's narrative is complicit is acknowledged, and the memoir is valuable insofar as it reveals contradictions that are attentive to questions of historicity and concreteness. While the narrative reveals, often unconsciously, the costs and consequences of liminal status, it remains coy about complicity, preferring to offer generalized commentary rather than delve into the shame and guilt, the loss and anger that characterize the Vietnamese community in the US. Successful American stories, as Pham would be aware, fit in well with the model minority stereotypes, which overlooks issues of race, alienation, poverty, and deprivation within these communities. It is probably the desire to evade historical detail, to believe in the myths of the model minority, that shaped the conclusion to Pham's memoir, whereby return is not so much an end in itself, but means to an end, that end being integration with America. This would explain the epiphanic moment in a town in Vietnam where, swimming with an old lady, the past is laid to rest, his Americanness is validated, and he can return home in peace to be a better American. Pham's journey through the landscapes and memory of Vietnam are about the revalidation and reconfirmation of the self. A journey back to Vietnam with one's gaze fixed towards futures in the United States. Thank you, and sorry about the interruptions.
Thank you, Professor Subarna Chatterjee, for a very interesting and insightful paper, and a paper that perhaps at the fag end of the conference brought insights from a new world, a world of refugee studies. I don't think there has been any other period in human history when there were so many refugees or immigrants in the world. And the challenges that they face when they go to a different country. Just recently, we can think of the Afghan refugees, and we can think of those horrible images when they just wanted to get out of their own country and go anywhere, wherever their destiny or opportunity took them. But then when they go to a new country, the first couple of years go in lifting themselves from the state of destitution, integration, and so on and so forth. And when they arrive at a certain measure of prosperity, then other ontological questions come in, all the exilic questions and the bipolar identity that your paper brings out. You drew upon beautiful insights from both Stuart Hall and Arif Terilek and asked significant questions about home. Right, and the question that how far we can go back in search of our home. Where are you from originally? That is so resonant of the questions that are being asked nowadays in different societies. So all in all, a very interesting and insightful paper. This is now open to questions and comments. I don't think there are any questions in the chat. So the participants, perhaps they can turn on their microphone and ask questions.
I think colleagues, if they want to say something, there are many of us who are working in the area of diaspora. Because when you talk about home, I think the partition also comes to mind, the refugee problem and the partition. And when I was dealing with the Dalit narratives from Bengal, this idea of, where is home? And since my own father was from Faridpur, from East Bengal, so for him, home I think always was not here. Home was where his childhood was spent. So when we went to Kerala, the geography and the topography is so similar to East Bengal. It is that this looks like home. So this in search of, the continuous search for the sense of home. And when you talk about for them, I think yes, Bengal is home, but where they have spent for me, because I've been brought up here, that sense is not there. For me, this is home, but for my father's generation, what they have left behind, and that of course the trauma also related to that, that also remains to be part and parcel of the psyche.
And during the weddings, in the invitation card, it will be written formally from Faridpur or
Yes, Faridpur, Kumilla. That it is underscored, and then those of us, I think, Sumadra read a very beautiful paper today on Rajvamshis and the whole idea of language, and any Bengali would know this whole Bengal and the divide between the Ghoti and the Bengal. So the West Bengal and the East Bengal and the dialect and the food habits, everything is different. So that going
That's
backwards, that's something which I think you're always looking behind your shoulder, looking backwards. Well said,
having moved
backwards.
out of India, Dr. Broti,
I
I
know.
how much understand what you're saying. And we when we move out, like for me, it wasn't. I didn't want to move out of India. I was never wanting to leave India, and was like, I'll come back in 2 years. And then you go out, and then your life is like that. You get stuck, and then there are things you develop an affiliation for the new place, and you're never able to leave your origins. So it's always a divided thing. But we're still very well off, and we can go back home, and those choices today are available. But if you look at a lot of people that we're talking about who don't have those choices, it's a different life altogether. The labor which comes, for instance, and spends a life away from their families because they're earning. And so I'm talking of today's context also. For instance, in Dubai, we have a very large labor force which comes and they spend a lifetime. And of course, they're back home, their standard of living really goes up because they're earning better and they are making their lives better at home, but at a very huge cost. And so it's very relevant today what you've spoken, Professor Chatterjee. Something that the management institutes and all also should be reflecting on, because we employ the labor, right? And in a way, if you look at it, they are bringing well-being back at home, so they are here by choice. And yet there is little choice because economics plays a big role in that as well. And I'm talking of people who are welcome, right? We are not talking of those who've been shunned away, who don't have a land, who don't have a place. And we've seen so much of agony in the recent years. I mean, it's been very very nice
Because for that
to
class,
hear
the whole
presentation.
energy is spent in the everyday struggle.
The-
They have no time to.
Absolutely, the life is only about that. There is nothing beyond. It's about just finding their feet all their life. And then we see one or two people shine out of that, and then we glorify and think that's what it is, which perhaps are few
Absolutely.
examples which are heartening.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I agree. I'm very glad you brought that up because it does not exist, as you said, in the popular imagination. We don't think about them. So
Right.
in the entire Middle East, whether it is Dubai or Qatar or the way in which
Yeah.
flows of labor, transnational
Yeah.
flows of labor. But the important thing that you said, I think, Professor Bajaj, is that they are at least welcome. What about the
That's
unwelcome?
right.
Yeah.
That's right. No, in
So,
fact, if you,
Syrian,
Dr. Chatterjee, if you look at many things which I realized after coming here, they have many rights here, which perhaps, the governments are making sure they get it. There are exact times that they have to, during the summers, they need to have 4 hours of rest in between. So the government insists on that. There is a security that the employer has to keep with the government so that they can go back home once every year and meet. So there are government rules which kind of protect them in a lot of ways. Yet, those are too few for us to be saying there are plenty. But then, yeah, and then there are a lot of people who would play around with those so that they don't pass on to the people. But on a larger scale, if we see it they are welcome, right? There are rights that they have to some extent. There is well-being for them, and they are here by choice. So if they don't want, they can go back. They still have their village. They still have their people. Not like the immigrants who don't have. I mean, if we look at right now, Afghanistan and some of these other countries in the Arab world, which have been Syria, for instance, it's been very sad that there is so much of bloodbath still, and they're still finding their place.
But apart from political migrations or crisis migrations, migration otherwise is a condition of modernity, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, very nice you said, Professor Azuddin, because the other part of it we look at is we celebrate globalization, right?
Okay.
And we are celebrating that we are moving out because that is how the cross pollination will happen. How will we learn from each other, right? So, in a way, that needs to be also celebrated, that if you can find a home outside and you blend. So, if we look at our children, who would have gone and settled, let's say, again, I'm talking of the diaspora here, but I'm just again talking from, I'm not a professor of that, but my own children, they are now in the US, right? So for them, again, it's India and it's the US. But I think the next generation would be American. So those who have the second generation, then they kind of adapt to the new place and start living there with some roots that they always want to linger on to, that that association. But when they are welcome, it's then it's nice. I think it's the global world. In Dubai, I mean, we have about 200 countries represented. India forms the largest percentage. We are about 30% Indians here, so it's like a mini India in Dubai, in UAE. But having said that, my first exposure, which is just like if some when and I always say, when you go to a new country, what is the most shocking sight for you that brings alive to you what that place is? And for me, it was when I went to a beach, and there was this lady, who was wearing a bikini. She was coming out of the beach, and next to her there was a lady with her full black clothes on and also coming out of the beach, right? And for me as an Indian, both was different, right? Because most of the times in India, we would have women with swimwears and stuff on the beach, and some slightly longer clothes, and we wouldn't have women wearing full clothes into the water, right? And those two coexisting here, I think that brought out very beautifully for me what Dubai is trying to be, which is very nice.
Right, there are diasporas and diasporas. For me, the defining moment when I got down from the plane in Qatar, I think, and this lady in the customs, Arab lady, she was instructing in Hindi, idhar jao, udhar jao, right? The craft.
Right.
And then throughout my visits, I find that I don't have to use any other language except my Hindi or Urdu, and I can get by. Right.
And Prof, when I came to Dubai and I went to buy some curtains there's a place called here, Bar Dubai and clothes, and I go there, and there is this gentleman who's selling the cloth there and telling me, speaking with me in Hindi, which sounded very Kashmiri to me, the Kashmiri Hindi dialect. So I asked him, I said, are you Kashmiri? And he kept evading the mic. And in the end, when I purchased and he sat down and was comfortable, I asked him, I said, where are you from? He said, I'm from Iran. And I said, but you speak such good Hindi. So he says, I have to live in Dubai. I was like, what's that? you know. So to survive in Dubai, he learned Hindi, and then he's
And
been doing
wherever you go,
business.
you get the kadak chai, which is the Indian version of the tea, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think this discussion is an excellent way of responding to the paper of Shubhanu Chatterjee, which I really find that it has asked some very significant questions about migration studies, refugee studies, the ontological condition through which a certain class of refugees, if not all the classes, they go through. And thank you, Shubhanu, once again for bringing these insights to us. I would now welcome Professor Geeta Bajaj to make her presentation.
Uh, Thank you so much, Professor Asuddin and Dr. Biswas, for inviting me here, Dr. Chavla for inviting me here. And so although I generally don't like to start on an apologetic note, but really my last 15-20 days became so hectic and travel that I didn't get time to put together. I wanted to put together a presentation to share my thoughts, which I haven't been able to do, but I would like to share my thoughts. Mine is not a paper that I'm presenting, but I'm bringing to light my thoughts on the women in workplace. So I'm talking of the corporate world and how some of the things that we are talking about in the business schools when it comes to participation of women in workplace. Yeah. Recently, there's been Dr. Brotti, can I have the rights to share? So maybe because I could not put together a lot of things, maybe I'll just share some. Okay, I
Share
have
your
the
screen.
rights.
You can, you
Yes.
can share your screen.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. I'll do that in between. I'll switch between a few reports that I'd like to highlight as I talk, and I'll share. And I'll keep it short, right? So the first thing, there's been recently a McKinsey report which has come out, which is about women in workplace. And let me just share the screen for that. No. Oh, Google does not allow that. How does it work? Allow me 1 minute, please, to figure this out. Into a tab. Okay. All right. So this is a 2021 McKinsey report which has come out on women in workplace, and it highlights that there have been some gains. So they've been coming out with this report since 2016, and there have been certain gains to that, to the participation of women in the workplace. And what you're seeing here is from 2016 to 2021. It shows the 1 second. It shows the part how there has been some improvement in the participation of women now in the workplace. Now this report, let me come up share up front, is a reflection of corporate America. So because the study is based on that, and what I'm going to move on from here is some other parts of the world, and we'll see, and then I'll make the point that I'm trying to make. So if we see at the entry level, right, or manager, senior manager, vice president, senior vice president, or C-suite level, all of these levels, we see there has been an increase in the participation of women in the workplace, right? However, as is clearly seen, the women participation at entry level compared to the C-suite level, we see a complete decline along the as we move up the ladder. So first important thing to note, that if we are going at a pace when from 2016 to 2021, 5 years brings a change of plus 2% points, then how much time are we thinking we will take to bring about the parity? That's a question that we need to think about. That is that progress good progress? Can we celebrate that? Second, we notice how it continues to decline as we move down as we move up the ladder, and then we see how evident is the glass ceiling, how it's so apparent that women can make it only to certain levels, and beyond that there is a gap. If you look at how the onlys start to work, when I say onlys, meaning how we are, when I'm the only woman, then I'm a color woman, so I'm a double only, or I can be a triple only in the workplace. So we again here notice in the report that every step of the corporate ladder, women of color lose ground to white women and men of color, so to everybody. So when it comes to double, so take a look at the participation again. The white men 35, the white women 30. But if we look at the men of color and women of color, we start seeing the difference. And as we keep moving up the ladder, continue to see the difference, how it reduces to 4% here and 13 here, and it is all the white men. And so all this celebration that we keep hearing about, some of us Asians making to the top and really heading the biggest organizations in the world, I'm not saying that's not worth celebrating. We have so many, not so many, but we have some men and women from India as well who we celebrate very much. But it's important to see these numbers, that they are too few, right? And those are challenges that they do face. Now, I'm going to now show, give me 1 second. So I thought I'll start on a positive note, on a country which is doing one which is amongst the best, which is doing amongst the best when it comes to how women participation is. And then from there, I'll move on to the other regions. And for me, the other regions that I plan to pick up today are the Arab world and India, because I thought that's where I come from, so I can speak with a lot of authority when I talk about here and with my experiences in India. So let me just share a few slides here. One second. This is female participation in the workplace across the world. I'm giving you a few seconds to digest what we have on the screen. It's not something very heartening for us, of course. It's based on a World Bank report, and which was presented by Udit Mishra in a recent article. And if we can see where India is, right, in terms of the women participation, you can see, and here, and then 2005 onwards, and it's gone down to below, almost around 20%. If we are comparing India with, in the same breath, we compare ourselves with China and US and Sweden and some of the developed countries, and we say that corporate India is competing with them. If we look at it on this, can you see the big difference? They are all above 50% here, and we are way below 20%. And not just that, if we compare ourselves with the Indian subcontinent, even Bangladesh is doing better. I'll show you the next slide. Even Pakistan is doing better. And we have, in fact, Saudi Arabia coming up here because there have been, recently some measures taken. Now, I'm going to show you one slide more. I'm just trying to share this figure also. Now, of course, all of this needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, and also with some more nuances that I need to raise here. For instance, is this really the fact that India has such low participation of women, or is that what we need to start questioning? Because we know that women in India have been working very at all levels, but when we talk of these figures, we do not count the women who are not getting salaries. So the women who are still contributing to the economic growth of the country perhaps are not counted here, right? So when we're talking of an unorganized sector where a whole lot of women are working, they just don't get counted. So if today, if I'm speaking of a woman who is working at home, she's got a cow and she's breeding the cow, she sells the milk, she runs the house from the milk. The husband's extra salary is a driver. And I'm just sharing a true story that I happened to hear from the driver that was running me from Delhi to Aligarh in the last week. And he says, no, my wife is not working. And when I tried to challenge him and I said she's working at home, slowly I figured out she's managing the home, she's managing the kids, she's running the house, she has a cow she maintains, she sells the milk, and the house runs on that itself, and she also works in the farm. And he's able to manage the house. The husband's salary is the add-on salary which they are using for well-being and other things. But she never gets counted into the workforce because that's an unorganized, unpaid work that the woman is doing. Right? So disparities that we're talking about, that brings me to the next thing, that how come then India is below some of the countries like, Saudi Arabia and all. So let me share, when I came here, I had a very different view of the Middle East. And of course, the Middle East, when I say, is also extremely diverse, right? But if I talk of the UAE, for instance, which is the shining island in this particular desert, uh, women participation is 52% today over here. But that brings in a whole lot of immigrants who are here to work, right? So they get counted into it. But that's not the only thing that we are hiding from the fact. If we don't notice that the government is taking so many measures, has announced that there will be 50% participation of women on the boards. And so in the government jobs, there will be 50% participation. So if there are not enough women who can come up, they are nominated from families, they are nominated from various places, but they are there on the board with 50%. Now, if that is happening, there is research which indicates that when you will do such interventions over a period of time, it will become a reality where the women will automatically be elected to be in. But that's not the case right now. But yes, their participation is improving. And the rest of the countries are getting inspired by that. Having said that, the social fabric is also changing, but uh, a huge variation that you would see between, for instance, UAE and the Saudi Arabia, which is still at a stage where they are just recently permitted that the women will start driving. So, on one hand, they are very rich and they have comforts, but in terms of identity, there is still a very long way that they have to go to. So, why did I bring up this? I just thought that women in workplace is not one topic that it has its own regional nuances that we have to look at and we're talking about. The second thing we're talking about in the business schools is that once the women get into the workplace, then again there is a plenty that needs to be looked at. So if we look at women in the workplace, it starts from recruitment where there are biases. There are options that are not available to women. Biases of a qualified woman having a problem because the recruiter would have in the mind whether she's going to get married and stick on, or she's going to move out, and therefore should we recruit or not, and between the two should we have, which one should we recruit. So those biases about competence in certain jobs, and biases of opportunities available to them. So once you get married, then what is happening? So while there is a lot of conversation in the classes to challenge all of that and make the managers of the next level understand these nuances as to why it's important to have women and diversity in the workforce, and how is it making a business sense for the corporate and not just a social obligation for the corporate that you have women. But when your internal systems are not reflecting your external environment, you're not a fit. So if your 50% of the population to which you are serving is not represented, you don't understand your audience and you don't know how to handle that. So we are doing those conversations, but it's a long way to go. It starts from there, and then I'm talking right now of the most qualified. If I go down, then one of the things our governments have been able to do is bring up the education level for the women, but there again the opportunities for them are very little. So if a woman has studied 10th or 12th, there are job opportunities which are not available to them, which are available to the men. So a man can become a driver, can become a security guard, can come to a city and look for a job. For a woman who might be in a village and may have done that study, those options are still not available. So therefore there is a huge gap. Even if you study, whether you at a village level I'm talking of, or I'm talking at a in even in the biggest cities, there is a big gap. I was raised as we were two sisters, and our parents raised us as these are our two sons, and we'll raise them. I did engineering, and after when I was to join, I applied for mechanical engineering, right? And I got through for electronics, which was number one, and mechanical was number three. But my parents and everybody who were very very liberal, they did not agree to my doing mechanical engineering because that's all men, and if you've got electronics then you do it. So I ended up doing electronics engineering. And then when I got my first job in a company, which is a very very big company, I don't know whether I should name or not, but I'll avoid. It's a multinational global company, uh, from India based. And I got selected there, but they did not give me the final offer. And then later on I figured out, because there was a conscious decision that most of the girls after engineering would get married and then they may not join. And so that is why I didn't get, and then I got another offer and I joined. So those biases that women have to face at the time of recruitment itself and for opportunity itself, and then moving on to microaggressions in the workplace, which is which is now a well researched area for us, where microaggression comes in the form of you not being heard when you are making a suggestion, that you're just glossed over. People don't trust you would have so much of wisdom to be making those comments on your emotional state. So if a man is emotional and a woman is emotional, the men's emotional state is looked at differently as it is from women, who would be the comments on their emotional state would be much different. So there are multiple microaggressions. So things like even telling them at 5 o'clock. So those understandings of when you we do this I'm sharing with you, do these conversations in the class about women understanding that when you're in the workplace and somebody tells you it's 5 o'clock, you leave this work, I will finish it for you, and they make you do that repeatedly, then again you're seen in the corporate place as somebody for whom the workplace is less important than working, than doing your bit at home. There has been a recent debate on paternity leave and how much should be the paternity leave and should be given. And the questions that we're raising on that is that if you give the paternity leave, would men still avail the paternity leave? So if we give them 6 months off, we give 6 months off to women, they will definitely take, or 3 months off to women, they will take. If you give 3 months off to men, do they take that, or would they fear that they would lose out in the corporate world and not take? So those are debates that are happening in the management world, and we are saying that HR policies have to be made which are driving home gender parity, where the men share the load of raising the it's different in the more developed world, where the men do take a section of the work, more larger part of the uh, work at home, as compared to what we see in some of the uh, shall I say, the Indian subcontinent, even in the Arab world, we're not seeing men doing as much at home as we would see in the more developed world. So we are doing those conversations in the classes, and there is research which is supporting all of this, but there are miles to go. We talk of a few companies which have excellent policies, but that's too few, right? The third is about how the COVID has impacted, the other important thing that we're talking about these days in the business schools, about the impact of COVID on women and so on. There is plenty of research. So let me just share one more. There's a Forbes report that has talked about the new unpaid work, and so how the uh, give me one second. No. Okay. No. So the Forbes report, which talks about how the COVID, where the women had to work from home, is different from men working from home. While the reports show that the men want to come back to the offices, the women have tried to balance between the work from home for the office work as well as the homework, but that has really increased both the burnout, the stress levels on the women, who are now taking a major share, more bigger share of the work at home than what they were taking. There is a study which has happened in Netherlands, which shows that, and one of the countries, Sweden and Netherlands, which have really done very well in terms of bringing about gender parity. The study shows that the COVID period of 1.5 2 years, because it came out about 6 months back, has taken back their goals by 7 years. So what they were attempting to achieve by 2030, now they can dream of achieving that by 2037, not before that. So much it has taken back from the women, as far as many women have started leaving their jobs. They found it extremely stressful. Now, that against another last fact that I'm sharing here, which the again the report, the Women in Workplace report indicates that women have shown exemplary leadership during the COVID, because the COVID times were times when women had to go and demonstrate that they can empathize with people, they can understand what have been their problems during the COVID period, how they're managing their home front, and all of that. They've done better than the men. So let me just, Dr. Broti, do I have another 2-3 minutes, or have I exhausted my time?
You have.
I've exhausted my time.
No, no,
Okay,
no.
so
You
then I
can.
will.
You have 2 minutes.
I can.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have to do. Okay. Okay. So just give me 1 second. I want to show that here in terms of the contribution of women during the COVID. Mhm. No, I think uh, I don't have that file readily open for me. So I'll just share that how women in leadership positions have taken up the front of helping, understanding the employees and helping them tide through this very difficult period, which the reports indicate how they have been more empathetic compared to men. And I'm saying in terms of the based on research, which shows numbers show, and that has not been recognized. So that is not something which the corporate or the top management really values, that you have done that. So it just goes unnoticed. It's a job that you did, and that's fine. But it's not. But in terms of corporates understanding that to manage their employees better, they would need empathetic managers, and women, when they bring that to the table, is an immense value they are bringing. Just one slide of the microaggressions. Let me just share here before I close. One second. And this, I'm talking again about America. So if you take a look at microaggressions, others questioning your judgment, right? And so, sorry, I'll try. Yeah. So for men overall and for women, right? Hearing or overhearing insults about your culture, that kind of is now not such a major issue in terms of the difference, right? But after that, if you start looking, others commenting on your emotional state for men and for women, being interrupted or spoken over more than others for men, for women, others questioning your judgment for men and for women, right? And the moment you start going further and you start seeing like how it is for white women, for Latinos, for black women, Asian women, so you will start seeing how each of those one added demographical difference brings about a difference to how you are perceived, because these are all subconscious biases that are coming forth, not that anybody plans to do that, but these are subconscious biases that come forth, and we see them all playing out in the corporate world. Uh, the good thing is that at least in business schools, we've started talking about them. Uh, the students, normally the generation that's coming in is open to listening and talking, but then that I think is a good start, but still a very long distance from um, long distance from where we have to be, right? Pay gaps is another area that is a conversation, and glass ceiling is another conversation. Very, very apparent, though we like to close our eyes to it. If education sector is one sector where we have women participation in hordes, right? That's one place that we have large number of women who are participating. And I'm asking the audience, how many women vice chancellors do we have in our country? And how many times we've had a woman heading the UGC or heading the AICTE or heading some of these Association of Indian Universities. We don't have any names. I'm talking of management institutes. How many management institutes have women directors? We have one at Calcutta now, right? And we've had, so I can count a few on my fingertips, the women who are now in those positions, but very few. So consider 1,000 institutes, management institutes in India now for 70 years, and I'm saying I can count some 7 to 10 women who have been at a director position in a management institute, and I'm talking of education sector. We talk of Bollywood, and you see pay gaps. 5 of the women actors now have raised their voice. So it's Deepika Padukone and Kareena Kapoor. And so these are ones that we know who have done exceptionally well, and they have come out and spoken up that they're also not paid equal to a Salman Khan and a Shah Rukh Khan, right? And of course, the conversation comes back to that you get what you fetch. So if Salman Khan is able to generate more money, he gets more money. But where do we? Is that a reflection of the society? Or is that a vicious cycle that we are in, which we will not break? So what is it, right? So there's the women representation in cinema, for instance, again, is something that, because again there is on a debate on freedom of expression, and on the other hand, what is it that you're representing women as, that whatever it is the audience ready to consume is what we are ready to represent them as, or is there something more in depth that needs to be thought out when you come out with policies for men? Because at the end, if we are giving huge amounts of money to brand ambassadors who are for different products, meaning public follows them, right? Whatever they do, public follows them. So therefore, whatever happens in cinema does make a difference to what the audience do. So what is the representation of women in cinema? And those are questions that have to be pertinently raised. These are being debated currently in the management circles, and we do have research happening. They've started creeping into the management school classes, and again, even in the classes, it's too little. I think there has to be more conversation on that. That we are all together today discussing this is very heartening. Thank you so much. That's what I thought I will share in terms of my thoughts. It's not a research based paper, but it's certainly something that I do talk about with colleagues and student managers and corporates when I'm talking to them about gender representation in the corporate world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gita Bajaj, for a very interesting paper based on empirical surveys and giving us snapshots from different spaces, different spheres. And some of the observations would also help us deconstruct some stereotypes, because for me, the women participation in the UAE is a pleasant surprise, because we have the stereotype that that is a part of the world where women are not allowed to work or they don't participate in any gainful activity. which of course is we do have stereotypes. But then you also have pointed out there are domains that are dominated by man, but perhaps there are also domains that are becoming spatial preserves of women. For example, let us say English studies. You find that that is an area that is being increasingly dominated, and for good reasons, by women. And to give you a good news, and this is just an anecdote, because we have a woman vice chancellor, perhaps the first woman vice chancellor in a central university based in Delhi. And we have recently been awarded A++ by NAC. So yesterday there was a celebratory meeting, and while the vice chancellor was addressing this particular issue, she of course pointed out that, look here, I have chosen my pro vice chancellor as a woman. I have chosen my other officials, including the finance officer, just to send the right kind of signal. And then she was pointing out that recently we have this prestigious fellowship called Prime Minister's Fellowship. He said that 9 of our students have got this fellowship, and one boy also got it. That is the way she
Right.
So I don't think the scene is absolutely bleak. We are making steady progress, but as you say, we have to have these conversations, right? So Professor Bajaj's paper is open to questions and comments, and Subarna has raised his hand.
Absolutely.
Bajaj, thank you very much. I liked your presentation very much. I just wanted to ask you about since you started with the Indian context. One is, of course, as you pointed out, the very low participation of women in the workforce. And this has actually been declining, as you know. Now, there are two things here which I wonder what the implications of. One is, as you pointed out, the fact that they work in the informal sector where their work is not seen as contributing to economic growth. So that is an invisibilization of work.
Yes.
Coupled with this decline in women's participation in the workforce. Now, according to you, what are the implications of this? Because this seems to me to be a very serious problem. We have token vice chancellors, we have token heads of corporations, yeah? But this is a trend that has been going on for a while, and so I just wanted to know what your thoughts on this were, because this seems to me a dual invisibilization.
Absolutely no, and I couldn't agree more with you that this is very, very serious, because you see, finally, if we look at it, we all need space. When I say space, and I'm saying we have all scholars sitting here, this world is a game of power, right? And when you do not have any financial power, you don't have a social status, you don't even have a means of, and within the social status also, if you don't have any of those powers, how do you get heard? And if then your ability to get those powers is also declining, right? Because by being one of the very important things, of course, one is that when women work, there is the benefit to the corporate world that I'm talking. We can look at how the corporates gain when they have women in the workplace. So that is the business case for the corporate. How the society gains when there is women which is working, because we all have been talking about that when the mother is educated, a family is educated, right? So when a mother goes out and worked, there is a family that's getting influenced. So that is one. But even looking at from a woman's individual's perspective, where is her voice? And this decline is actually an indicator of a decline of the voice of the woman. and which is, I think, should be the most, should be the primary concern, right? While we make those cases so that people listen to us, but I think women losing their voice is the most serious implication from my, if you would ask me, of this decline in the workplace. um, it's not that they, whether it is that they do not wish to be or they cannot be, either which ways, this is a serious concern.
Is there any socio-political reason behind it?
There are many reasons, Dr. Broti. Socio-political has to be a reason also. So if the political reason is bringing them down, can be one, but if it is not bringing up, that is also a concern. So if anything is this declining, can we not hold the governments accountable everywhere? So there have to be interventions by the government which are enabling women to come up, right? Which are enabling a positive intervention. In fact, there is plenty of research which indicates that interventions which are made for reversing the trends that you have make a difference over a long time. Now, what are the interventions happening is, you're sitting in India would know better than I would,
Well,
right?
I don't know.
I'm
I
sure
can't.
that
I
as a government,
today
no, I'm
today
sure that
morning I opened the WhatsApp and I see that we have celebratory messages saying that UGC has taken a very positive action, and it's going to give maternity leave to undergrad and postgrad students. Is it a positive action, or is it which way are we going? One reaction comes to my mind, that are we celebrating, when we teach feminism in the classroom, we talk about the glorification of motherhood. And if a undergrad student, how old is she, 18, 19? You are giving her maternity leave for what? Then she will get into that whole bind of motherhood, and there is no other and will she be able to come back to academics? And I don't know. It seems to be, there was this euphoria around it, but I don't know. I'm a little critical about it. I think we need to think through
yeah, but
policies
the
with
other thing is that
means.
if there are women who are already there in that space and are not having that support,
Yes, Prati, I think
then are
Prabhakar
we
is
closing
right.
our eyes to that reality?
The,
That must be the other way of. Sorry, Dr.
so
Sulita is saying something.
sorry, I was just pointing out what Prabhakar has written in the chat. It's for MPhil and PhD students, not for undergrads. I think I also read it's for MPhil and PhD students.
And
MPhil
plus, we
PhD
must
is
take the
okay.
Women who are
WhatsApp
pursuing
University
higher
with a pinch of
studies,
salt.
almost till
We
job.
must. Huh? Another
MPhil
thing, Dr.
PhD is
Biswas,
okay,
the
but I don't know
WhatsApp
something I read it is
universities.
undergrads.
And
Undergrads,
no,
I
no, no,
find
it's
it
not
very
for
problematic.
undergrad. It's not for undergrad.
At the graduation, you'll be,
No,
Yeah.
it's for
No,
MPhil
undergrad is.
and PhD.
MPhil and PhD, well,
then it is okay.
Because at that time, circumstances can be any. If the girl
Yes,
gets married, she can get a chance at least
yeah,
to, go in for a higher study.
most of us
exactly.
are
What I
getting
feel.
do our PhDs
So it's a
post marriage
progress. In
also.
fact, I could
And
feel
the breaks,
towards the,
yeah.
because girls, especially, they are never encouraged by their in-laws to go in for PhD or anything. But if the leave is there, certainly they'll get a
Yes,
Some
relief.
chance, better
yeah,
chance,
They'll get a
better
relief.
chance.
Yeah.
I agree, Dr. Abha. Yeah. I mean,
That would be
I look
enabling.
back if we all could have got those. I couldn't get my study leave because Bhakti was already on leave. So
Same when I was in job,
Dr. Bhakti and
we
Dr.
used
Alka
to
were on leave,
get,
so I couldn't get a leave while I was doing my PhD.
even when
But
we were
it's
expecting,
interesting that
we used to
none
get
of
just
that
two and
Dr.
a half
Subarno
months
and Dr. Asuddin are
leave.
not
That's all.
complaining about the paternity leave.
Now at least people are
I
getting,
don't know.
now see,
And
at least
all
people
the
are
women
getting
are very
childcare
concerned
leave
about their
and
maternity
maternity for a
leave.
long time. Paternity also you are getting leave. We used to get 2.5 months leave. That's all.
But
So
you
we
know,
had,
Dr. Abha,
yeah.
in many companies these days which are progressive, especially for instance in the US, they are now giving paternity leave, let's say for 3 months, and they allow the parent to take it at their own wish. So what happens is now
That's good.
they so the mother takes it for some time, then supposing their parents come along, so that's when the men don't take. So when the parents go back, that's when the mother goes back, then the father takes the leave.
Oh, that's
So they are
good.
allowing that you can take 15 days, 10 days before the delivery, then you can
Yeah,
break it and take 15 days
yeah.
again. So you have a total span of that paternity leave which you can
Mhm.
break and take it over a period of time,
Oh, that's
which is extremely progressive, I think, in
yeah.
terms of thinking. You
Very,
don't
very
have to be away from your workplace. And with this work from home now becoming a reality, I think there are things that the corporate world should be thinking in terms of how they can support, right? Because if you can work from home and both can break it and take it, why should anybody, I mean, take it at a stretch for 3 months, depending on how they want to break it.
yeah.
I think those are
I think
some very
Shubhana wanted to
progressive
say
things
something.
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, Shubhana.
No, just an obvious thought. Care work, as you know, is largely gendered, but care work is not just carried out by women. I mean, increasingly, and care work is not just about children. It's about elderly parents,
Parents, yeah.
about disabled children, and so on and so forth. So there are various other networks of care work,
Correct.
which I think corporates are also factoring in.
That's right.
I hope academic institutions.
Yeah, governments also should factor it in, because it's not just paternity and maternity, but there are, I think Shubham, you raised a very pertinent point. When we look after our elderly parents, and it is so much of time,
Yeah.
energy which goes into it, and it's like
So, Dr. Prati, another thing which some of the companies are doing, and that was even before COVID, so they decided that every employee can decide that one day of the working week or 2 days of the working week, there where they want to work from anywhere, right? So for instance, sometimes I have to go and pay up some bills, I have to do certain odd jobs to the home, which I cannot do over the weekend, right? I have to go visit a school. So you have, let's say you decide every Wednesday I will be working from anywhere, not necessarily from home, and all you have to do is you have to log in at that time, you have to continue to work, but you can move around anywhere, do your job, and also do this once a week, every week. So for instance, Bosch has that, and they would permit their employees. Very, very, very helpful. I mean, work life balance, if you're allowing that to happen, it will enable. If you allow that for men, women have a chance to come and work. You're also
Yeah.
making it easy for the women, because you're
Women.
making it easy for the man to do that. And I think those are policies that the many corporates should think, that when their employees are happy, they would bring in far. So today, the another thing which we talk about, the whole competition is about creativity and innovation. You cannot sustain yourself in the marketplace if you are not creative, if you are not innovative. Are you expecting stressed out employees to be creative? I mean, there is, one has to see that creativity and innovation requires a lot of resources, right? And the resource is the human brain resource also, right? You need them to be relaxed, to be thinking, to be producing something. And if you have stressed and burnt out employees, how are you planning to compete? The employee turnover is another thing, Dr. Subarno, the question that you were raising. When women are there as part of the workplace, the turnover goes down. The people don't quit their jobs. The workplace environment is very different. Um, so there are many implications for the corporate itself, which is missing, which they are missing out. So we know what happened in Uber, right? And Travis Kalanick had, I mean, he conceptualized that whole new, he's changed the whole world when it comes to the taxi service. We know Uber changed the whole world. He conceptualized, he developed, he brought Uber to where Uber is today. And then he was in such a mire because of the kind of treatment that women were having in Uber, right? That there was so much discrimination that finally that one of these ladies who left the job, Susan, she after she left the job, she put up a blog saying what happened to her in Uber. So basically, she was, there she received on her social media open aggressive conversations from her boss. And when she reported to the HR said he's very senior and he's extremely good. He's highly productive in the company cannot afford to lose him. So, let's handle it nicely. And handle it nicely meant that you don't touch him. And then finally, they said to keep you safe, we'll put you in another department. So you have a problem with your boss. The boss doesn't, you're moved to another department so that you are safe, right? And when she moved to the other department, she realized there are other women who've had similar experiences with him. So it was not the first one, right? And then finally, when she moved out and she wrote, there was such a storm and everybody came out. And finally, Travis Kalanick was removed from the board, a company that you make from inception. You are thrown out of that company. Why? Because it's not just that one person. It wasn't, he would not have the courage to do that unless it's coming down, top down. So if you notice, then came out that when he took everybody out for a break, right, a company break, and then in his conversations he would say that he would talk about sex, he would talk about having sex, and so go enjoy, have safe sex. He would speak like that as the CEO of a company. When you're on a break, you have a few women employees who are there with you. You cannot speak that, right? So there is this all male chauvinist conversations in the company which were common, right? So it was a done thing, it was okay thing. So when the point of inflection came, when that woman wrote the blog, everything came out. So his speeches, others speeches, Uber, there were women outside who were their customers, right? So the customers were, that in India also we had cases of being raped in Uber taxis. And so why? You are not conscious. Because you are not conscious, you are not taking care of those things when you are employing people. So there are repercussions. When your customer base 50% is women, how can you not have women in your organization to understand what they think, what are their problems, how they have to be addressed? And if you will have their equal representation, those things will come up and they will show in your business. And that is how you end up paying. So he ended up paying like that. So the corporate world has to understand it's not a social service they are doing. It's a long-term investment they are doing. Not just long, even short-term they get gains out of it. But they have to see it. They are unable to see right now. But
Thank you.
good thing is many bigger companies, multinational companies that we do see, there are a lot of affirmative actions which are being taken. Though we know that Amazon has been in a lot of media, has been receiving media attention because of their work practices, because they are very hard taskmasters. So the work-life balance is off because the more you work, you get. So on one hand, it's very meritorious. So you rise because you're doing very, very hard work, extremely hard work, you can rise very fast. But what is the implication for the rest? There's no work-life balance because anybody who works hard goes up. So then, should there be a stop? Should there be a work-life balance imposed in organizations, or should we be so competitive? Is something that we need to think about. And those are gender debates in the corporate world.
I think those debates will continue in all the other spaces too. And anyway, I revisited the notice and it says I was not wrong. Towards the last two lines says that colleges should look after their undergraduate and postgraduate students also. Highlighted is the MPhil PhD, but that also is there. So there is a subtext to the main text. So anyway, let's not get into the debate because my hackles were up because of that. Anyway, let's come back to our space, and we have had a very fruitful journey. So over to you for your remarks.
Thank you, Professor Bajaj. We have had two very interesting papers in this session, and it both of them generated good discussion, not in the purely stilted academic terms, but in interactive personal anecdotes, which are sometimes more insightful than mere academic discussions. I think the valedictory session is also a time when we go back to our inaugural and try to see what we have achieved. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate Dr. Bati Biswas and her excellent team for thinking up this theme, which I think is extremely timely. We have marginalities of all kinds that plague the society now. And as I went through the schedule, I could find that the range was very wide. Our young research scholars and not so young research scholars, they have brought ideas and concepts and insights from different realms. And that is how the development of conversation gradually solidifies into academic debate. Just think of it that 20 years ago, the lit literature was something one rarely heard of. But in the 2 decades, it has consolidated itself strongly in the academic domain. And we have so much of fruitful studies coming out of that space. Because the lit literature is something that is written not in one language, not in two languages, but several languages of India. And they are not exactly identical because they differ. They have commonalities, but they differ significantly depending on the spaces they are coming from. And we are at a space now where we can conduct studies in different kinds of the lit literature, and the lit literature being written in different languages. Similarly, another significant area that has been addressed in several papers, I find, is disability. And it makes me think that perhaps only 4 or 5 years ago, the first conference in English studies happened in JNU on this particular area. And from there, we find that now this is becoming a subject of conversations in many of our conferences and seminars. Similarly, the plight of LGBT communities, the plight of the minorities, the plight, as I said, there are marginal groups and marginal groups. And if we think of ourselves, we also find that we may be, in some aspects, we may belong to a majority group, but in some other aspects, we belong to minority groups as well. And these conversations are extremely important because you find these dual tendencies now. While on the one hand, academically, we are becoming more and more sensitive. Politically, around the world, you find the emergence of those strongman macho politics, majoritarian politics that is very harmful, in fact, for all kinds of marginal groups and all kinds of marginalities. So there is greater and greater need for these conversations to take place. And I'm glad that this has taken place here, and I'm grateful to all of you to make me part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, all panel. I now invite Dr. Madhuri Chawla to give the official vote of thanks. Principal sir is really busy, so he has thanked all our plenary, the participants, and he has expressed his regret that he is not able to join us. Over to
Thank
you,
you.
Madhuri.
Thank you, Dr. Biswas. esteemed chair of the valedictory session, Professor M. Asaduddin, and distinguished speakers, Professor Geeta Bajaj and Professor Subarno Chatterjee. Principal Dalsing Evening College, Professor Pavan Kumar Sharma, as Brati just told us, could not make it, although he did wish to and he had informed in the morning that he would, but somehow he's been caught up. Dear colleagues, paper presenters, participants, and students, a very good evening to all of you. It is a matter of great honor for me to present this vote of thanks on behalf of the organizing committee to all those who have contributed towards the successful culmination of the two-day conference on resistance and revolutions, the politics of marginality, organized by the Department of English, Dal Singh Evening College, University of Delhi. I take this opportunity to thank Professor M. Asaduddin, Department of English, Jamia Millia Islamia, for accepting our invitation to chair the valedictory session and for taking the discussion forward with his wisdom and his discernment. Thank you, sir, for your invaluable contribution and all your inputs to the session and the conference and for adding gravitas by your presence. We are also very grateful to Professor Geeta Bajaj, HR and Communication, Chairperson BBA Program, Dubai, IMT Dubai, for her enlightening talk on women in workplace perception, practices, policies. And her talk has not only drawn our attention to the dynamics of gender in the workplace, but has also helped us understand why such discussions, such conversations around gender and its various intersections are important to build a more inclusive society and more inclusive organizations and societies. Thank you, Professor Bajaj, for your presentation. Our sincerest gratitude to Professor Subarno Chatterjee, Department of English, University of Delhi, for his insightful talk on Vietnamese Americans and the pain of multiple unbelonging. His talk indeed was a perfect end to the brilliant. It wasn't in the end; it was a little before that, but it was perfect to conclude the sense of unbelonging that prevails in the society, and to the brilliant series of speakers that we have had all through, and even as he tugged at the heart of the theme of the conference. Professor Chatterjee, we thank you for sharing with us the findings of your invaluable research and your insights into the Vietnamese American society, and for reminding us to recognize the lived realities of the marginalized people and communities around us. The last 2 days, these 2 days, yesterday and today, have been extremely enriching and fulfilling, and we've had the privilege to listen, discuss, and reflect on issues of marginalization based on class, caste, disability, gender, race, and identity. We have seen and heard how the dire situations of social, cultural, ethnic, racial, and linguistic minorities are often exacerbated by numerous and complex factors which require tactful and urgent solutions. It has also been very encouraging and exciting to see creative expositions of marginality in literature, texts, cinema, performance, folk songs, arts, and numerous other mediums that have voiced the marginalized experiences. As our hearts become full and our minds are enlightened after such wonderful presentations and debates and discussions, and to borrow from what Professor Tapan Basu said in the plenary session yesterday, we are wiser and also sadder after these thought provoking presentations. And it is difficult to remain complacent now. We have to acknowledge that there is so much more to do to build a just, an equal, and an inclusive world for all. And while, as we just now discussed, governments, policymakers, and institutions must lead, we must recognize that transformation requires the efforts of the individuals as well, of each one of us, and the society must work towards it. I strongly believe that this 2 day conference will enthuse many to work towards bringing positive change in the larger societal consciousness. A heartfelt gratitude to all the plenary chairs and speakers, Professor Tapan Basu, Professor Sharmishta Panja, Professor Rajkumar, Professor Anil Aneja, and Professor Crystal David Dawson. Chairs of the session, Professor Parmod Kumar Mehra, Professor Payal Nagpal, Dr. Saroj Kumar Mahananda, Dr. Ranjana Kaul, Dr. Hina Nandarjo, Dr. Tasneem Shehnaz, Dr. Madhumita Chakraborty, Professor Prem Kumari Srivastav, and Dr. Aisha Irfan. We consider ourselves very fortunate and blessed to have been graced by such luminous galaxy of academicians. We also extend our gratitude to the presenters for sharing their knowledge, experience, and research in their papers. Your presentations have not only enriched our knowledge and informed us about the area of your work and various other issues, but have also inspired us to act in solidarity in building a more inclusive world. Here, I would like to also thank our patron and principal, Professor Pavan Kumar Sharma, for being the pillar of support since the inception of the idea of this conference and until the end. Under his able leadership, the college has achieved much, and the success of this conference is a testament to that. My deepest thanks to and appreciation to Dr. Brati Biswas, the convener of the conference, for being the driving force behind everything. Her energy, her enthusiasm, her mindfulness, and her attention to all the details has been instrumental in bringing the conference together. I also thank the teacher coordinators who have worked tirelessly all through. Your sincerity and willingness to work are an asset to the department and to the college. And of course, I would like to specially mention our student volunteers who are an integral part of the system in all events. In this era of virtual conferences and webinars, the student tech team is the one which helps us bridge the gaps. And I would like to name Tushar, Akul, Christy, Parumila, Shruti, Ridhima, Priyanka, Priya Bhasin, Ritika, Sanjana, and Yumna for their excellent support, without which we would not this conference would not have been as successful. We are always very proud of our dear students for their contribution to every event. I would be failing in my duty if I did not thank for our fervent audience, the faculty members, the students of the college who have supported us by attending the conference these 2 days. We really appreciate your gesture of solidarity with us. Last but not the least, we are overwhelmed by the response we have received from participants across the country. We acknowledge your presence here today and we hope that this conference has widened your perspective on marginality and its many dimensions. We hope to see you in our upcoming events. Once again, I thank you all for your valuable contributions and for making the conference a huge success. It was with a deep sense of contentment and joy that I now conclude my vote of thanks. May the Alsing Evening College continue to live up to its glorious motto, gather ye the wisdom of the East and West, and may it continue to be a beacon of knowledge and learning. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madhuri. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. So we can leave now.
We can have an informal discussion if we wish, but I think otherwise.
Yes, I know you have been traveling, but you can leave and take rest. But thank you, Geeta, for coming on board and sharing your invaluable inputs. Because see, it's also always very important to have that